Chapter 41. With a determined step, Cain ventured into the enchanted forest, his trusted companions Murkrow and Slowpoke by his side. The dagger in his grasp glimmered in the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees as he consulted the map, matching landmarks to his surroundings. Murkrow, the wily and watchful bird, flew overhead, his keen eyes scanning for any sign of danger. In a place as treacherous as this, where danger lurked behind every twisted trunk, the AI system's range was not enough to ensure their safety. Slowpoke, using the move Confusion, floated behind, emanating a blue light from his steady gaze. He kept pace with Cain, ever vigilant, ready to defend them at a moment's notice. For they had learned their lesson well after their encounter with the formidable Golduck, and now Murkrow served as their first line of defense, spotting the enemy's tracks and attacking before they could reach Cain. And should the enemy break through his defenses, Slowpoke was prepared, ready to use Confusion to control the foe, and then swiftly defeat it with the assistance of Murkrow. And if even that should fail, Slowpoke's teleport would whisk them away to safety in the blink of an eye. The forest was eerily quiet, the aftermath of yesterday's battle between the mighty Gyarados and the elegant Milotic still fresh in the air. So for nearly an hour, Cain walked in relative comfort, the only sounds the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional rustle of bushes. But as they left the waterfall's misty embrace, more and more Pokémon seemed to materialize from the shadows. The map promised they were nearing the main route, and at their current pace, they would reach it within the hour. As Cain reached for his dagger to cut through a thick vine blocking their path, a hidden animal trail was revealed before him. Though it offered a greater chance of encountering Pokémon, it was a far better option than the thorny bushes and twisted branches that had hindered their progress thus far. Without hesitation, Cain stepped onto the path, his trust in his companions absolute. And sure enough, as if on cue, a fierce battle broke out shortly after. As Cain ventured deeper into the forest, a sense of unease settled heavy in his chest. Was it the fact that his luck had taken a turn for the worse? Or was it simply the dangerous path he had chosen? Wild Pokémon came at him in waves, each one hellbent on taking him down. But with Murkrow and Slowpoke by his side, the ferocious protectors of his journey, none of the Pokémon were able to break through their defenses. Murkrow, like a dragon returning to the sea, was a force to be reckoned with in the forest. His body had become accustomed to the heavy weights and his speed was almost as fast as when they first set out. Quickly weaving between the trees, he toyed with his enemies, dispatching them with ease. Take for example the Mankey, who had thought to sneak up on Cain with its quick tree-to-tree movements. But Murkrow spotted it the moment it struck, and with a single wing attack, the fighting-type Pokémon was dispatched in seconds. This was just one of many attacks. From the moment these Pokémon had chosen to attack Cain, their fate was sealed. Cain did not hold back and Murkrow and Slowpoke killed every Pokémon that dared to attack. It was survival of the fittest, and if they hadn't stood their ground, more and more Pokémon would have come, hoping to get lucky, until Murkrow and Slowpoke could no longer fight. A decisive, unrelenting kill might serve as a deterrent to nearby Pokémon. In the beginning, most of the attacks were made by the most powerful Pokémon in the area, so when they were killed, no other Pokémon dared to attack. But as they reached new areas, new Pokémon would attack without fear of death. Murkrow and Slowpoke were willing to kill any Pokémon that dared to attack them after the Golduck incident. Their resentment towards the Golduck was directed towards the Pokémon that came to them to die. As the blood of fallen Pokémon stained the forest floor, Murkrow and Slowpoke's killing intent grew stronger, a faint scent of blood hanging heavy in the air. Fewer and fewer Pokémon dared to challenge them. The journey that should have taken an hour stretched on for nearly 2, the trio battling their way through a never-ending horde of attackers. But despite the difficulties, the outcome was positive. Murkrow's level had risen to 18, and while Slowpoke's level had not increased, he had grown more proficient in his moves and more attuned to fighting under Cain's command. Most importantly, he was beginning to learn how to pace himself in battle and respond quickly to attacks. As they made their way back to the main path, Cain couldn't help but wonder if it was fate that had led him to flee from the Raticate colony and stumble upon the waterfall, where he had met Slowpoke and taken him under his wing. With a small sigh, Cain said, "Finally back on this path, it took a while," smiling bitterly. "Let's rest a little, prepare lunch, and then continue on our way in the afternoon." With a fire built from dead branches and leaves, Cain took out 2 of the 4 rabbits he had caught by hand that day, as well as some salt and pepper from his Team Rocket belt. He skinned the rabbits with his dagger, removed their entrails and cleaned them with water with the help of Slowpoke. Soon, 2 fluffy rabbits were transformed into 2 pieces of delicious rabbit meat. It didn't take long for 4 crispy golden rabbits to appear, and by then, Murkrow and Slowpoke, who had fought all morning, were already in front of him, their gaze fixed on the golden rabbit meat. Although poke blocks were more nutritious and tasted good, Murkrow couldn't resist Cain's expert roasting skills and always filled his stomach with pokeblocks after eating the roast meat. As Slowpoke laid eyes on the sizzling rabbit meat, drool began to pool at the corners of his mouth. He remembered the first time he had tasted Cain's grilled fish and couldn't wait to indulge in this new delicacy. Cain, with a smile on his face, expertly cut one of the roasted rabbits in half with his dagger, keeping a portion for himself, placing a whole rabbit in Murkrow's bowl and giving the rest to Slowpoke. Slowpoke, who could eat much more than Murkrow, could devour 2.5 rabbits effortlessly. The rest of his stomach would be filled with berries he would pluck using confusion on their journey. "All right, let's get started," Cain said, and with his permission, Murkrow and Slowpoke eagerly dug in. Murkrow was the first to finish, his greedy gaze fixed on the last rabbit in Slowpoke's bowl before lowering his head to eat the pokeblocks Cain had prepared for him. Slowpoke had wanted to share with his companion, but when Murkrow refused, he didn't push the matter. The leisurely lunch came to an end, and as the scent of the roast wafted through the forest, some Pokémon were attracted. But upon seeing Murkrow and Slowpoke and feeling the faint killing intent emanating from them, they quickly retreated. After the meal, Cain once again examined the map to plan their next move. As Cain returned to the main route, he knew that while the distance would allow him to reach his destination in one day, the many Pokémon he would encounter along the way would slow his progress. The deeper he ventured into the forest, the higher the level of the Pokémon he would encounter and the more difficult the path would become. But with Murkrow and Slowpoke back to full strength after a midday rest and lunch, the trio set out once more, deeper into the forest. Not long after they had left, a group of people appeared at the spot where Cain had just roasted his meal. The leader of the group, a man with a white slender hand and a sly smile, walked over to the ashes left behind, reached out and touched the warm ashes, then brought it to his nose and sniffed. With his back to his companions, he gave a grim smile and murmured, "What a coincidence, Cain." The last 2 words were spoken through clenched teeth. One of the men behind him, noticing his actions, stepped forward and tapped him on the shoulder. "Found anything yet, Soros?" Chapter 42. "Oh, nothing much," said Soros, a hint of a smile playing on his lips as he spoke to his companion. "Just stumbled upon a rather troublesome individual, shall we say?" The man's brow furrowed at the words. Troublesome? It was not often one came across another soul on this vast trial island, for even if a trialist ventured into the forest, most returned within a day's time, and being so far from the base, it was certainly not a same-day return. And if they could survive alone in the wild, their strength was not to be underestimated. Furthermore, if Soros deemed this person troublesome, they must certainly be one of the known trialists. Soros' grin slowly dissipated and he nodded gravely. "Of course, the first-place trialist, who doesn't know of him?" The man who had posed the question grew serious as well. While his impression of Cain was limited to that stoic face upon getting first place, he still harbored a certain unease towards the victor who had so effortlessly bested Xander. Soros had no secrets from the man beside him. They had known each other since childhood, and it was with this man's aid that Soros had been able to establish a humble force within the Team Rocket base. As the person who knew Soros best, his expression couldn't help but shift when he heard what Soros said. "No, you're not thinking of taking him on, are you? And how can you be certain it's him?" After all, Cain was a ruthless man who hadn't even given Xander the time of day. Xander's identity was no secret within the Team Rocket base, and with a big brother who was a senior officer within the organization, he would rise to great heights if he survives the trial. But instead, he was relegated to second place by Cain and could only utter a few bitter words. Soros glanced out of the corner of his eye at the group behind him, engaged in lively conversation, and said, "Sky, do you not think it is a miracle that he was able to overtake Xander without any support? Either he had a fortuitous encounter, or his Pokémon's talent is truly exceptional." Soros fixed his gaze upon Sky and continued, "I kept a watchful eye on him before he departed, and I saw him head in this direction. Do you think that this mission we are undertaking now was chosen by me at random?" Sky's eyes flickered with a hint of unease as he looked back at Soros. As for Soros' motivations for wanting to pursue Cain, while what he said made sense, Sky knew there was certainly more to it. In truth, the main reason was likely that Cain had snubbed his invitation and shown him disrespect at the conclusion of the previous trial. Sky, being the astute individual he was, wouldn't voice such thoughts aloud and had to admit that Soros was right. If he could uncover Cain's secrets, he might stand a chance of breaking into the top 10. He would not have offered his aid to Soros if he had not been unfortunate enough to be assigned a Pokémon of low talent. Truth be told, aside from that bright smile and the not-so-feeble coughing, Sky believed himself superior to him in every way. But the situation demanded that he rely on him if he hoped to survive this trial successfully. Aside from Xander, Team Rocket's Pokémon distribution was completely transparent, and the Pokémon one received and their talents were entirely a matter of chance. Soros, however, harbored fantasies of discovering Cain's secrets, becoming the top trialist, and eventually making a name for himself within Team Rocket and then the world at large. But we may not be able to defeat him, Sky replied, still in awe of Cain. After all, he had only placed within the top 30 in the previous test, so the gap between them was far too great. That doesn't matter, Soros said, his eyes drawn to the 5 individuals standing behind Sky. We must fight to see if we can defeat him, and even if we cannot, there will always be someone to have our backs. After a few moments of contemplation, the two made the final decision to test their mettle against Cain. A sly grin spread across Soros' face as he turned to face the 5 men. As Soros turned, the rest of the group, who had been engaged in a lively conversation about Pokémon, fell silent and turned their attention to him. A most extraordinary opportunity has just presented itself, and if we are quick to act, surviving this trial shall be a trifle for any of us, Soros declared. Upon hearing these words, the eyes of the 5 men immediately alighted with interest. They were faring well for the time being, but there was still a long way to go in this trial, and if there was a chance to improve their prospects, they would fight for it. Though there was little doubt about the veracity of Soros' words, one of the men still remained skeptical and asked, "You serious?" Soros looked at the man who had posed the question, a glint of amusement in his eyes, and replied, "Indeed, I have just confirmed it with Sky as well." All eyes immediately turned to Sky, who nodded in confirmation. The group was elated to receive confirmation from their 2 leaders. After the conclusion of this trial, only 50 seats remained for the trialists to contend for, and that had always been a sword hanging over their heads. If they could survive on their own, they would not have to rely on others. After all, relying on others was not a sound strategy in their present circumstances. First and foremost, I would like to establish some ground rules. Obey my orders at all times, no defiance or laziness, for if I discover any, the offender shall not be taken on another mission and shall have to fend for themselves. Sky stepped forward and said, his tone stern and commanding. Unlike Soros' good cop act, he had perfected the bad cop role. The group tensed, for none wanted to lose a backer, as that could cause problems back at the base. They quickly nodded, indicating their understanding. If you have any questions later, wait until everything is done before inquiring. Do not drag us all down with you. Sky continued, a note of warning in his voice. There was no guarantee that these men wouldn't flee before or during the battle if they discovered that their opponent was Cain, so they were given a precautionary warning beforehand. Again, there were no objections. At this point, Soros stepped forward, a charming smile upon his face, and said, "Do not fret, my friends, leave everything to me, and should we find ourselves in danger, I shall remain behind to cover your backs." The infectious smile and confidence gave the 5 men a sense of ease, reassuring them that all would be well. Sky's eyes flickered with a hint of coldness, but he quickly hid his emotions by saying, "Well then, let's hurry. Judging by the temperature of the ash, it should not be too far." Soros nodded and led the group into the forest with a wave of his hand. On the other hand, Cain, who walked through the forest at a steady pace, had no inkling that anyone was following him, nor that the ashes he had inadvertently left behind had alerted anyone to his location. But even if Cain had known, he would not have been troubled. Slowpoke, use confusion to keep that Meowth in check. Murkrow, use Screech and then finish it off with Wing Attack. Cain watched calmly as a wild Meowth was turned into a corpse by the combined attacks of Murkrow and Slowpoke. This level 20 Meowth with an orange aptitude had attempted to use its speed to sneak up on the seemingly vulnerable Cain, only to be knocked back by Slowpoke's confusion when it was still 3 meters away. Then came its attempt to flee, as seen in the previous scene. The Meowth that had fallen to the ground was simply one of the more commonplace Pokémon they had encountered on their journey. Well done, Murkrow and Slowpoke, Cain never hesitated to praise his Pokémon. After giving them his praise, he took a Pokeblock from his storage belt and fed it to Murkrow to replenish his energy. Slowpoke was still eating his citrus berry Pokeblocks, so he could not have any other Pokeblocks. Fortunately, Slowpoke had only used his psychic energy during the battle, so it could be quickly restored by using Calm Mind. The training goal Cain had set for Slowpoke was to be able to maintain Calm Mind active at all times, just like Murkrow did with Tailwind. Yadong, Slowpoke suddenly grabbed Cain's pants and yelled. Caw. Murkrow also flew to Cain and croaked softly. Cain was taken aback to see his 2 Pokémon react in such a manner. But as Slowpoke and Murkrow cooperated in their explanation, he realized what they were trying to convey. "Are you saying that someone is following us?" Cain asked, his suspicions growing as he spoke. Cain learned from Murkrow and Slowpoke's gestures that there was more than one person following them. And apart from the trialists, no other human would be seen in this forest. Chapter 43. It seems I have yet to establish my authority. Cain's words were spoken with a deadly calm, and the murderous intent in his eyes grew stronger. Since you want to test my strength, let me show you how wide the gap really is. Hiding the fury that raged within him, Cain commanded his Murkrow and Slowpoke to stay alert and on the lookout. He couldn't help but wonder who it was that dared to challenge him. I wonder who it is. Could it be Xander? He mused, his face expressionless. But he quickly dismissed the thought. If that was all Xander had to offer, there was no way he could have kept a steady lead on myself in my previous life. Another figure crossed Cain's mind. Could it be him? He thought. Soros was the type of person who seemed cheerful on the outside, but was rather narrow-minded on the inside. Cain knew that Soros held a grudge against him, and the thought of facing him in battle sent a thrill of excitement through his body. With a sly grin, Cain led Murkrow and Slowpoke down an overgrown path that gradually diverged from its original course. Soros and the others were unaware of this. In fact, some of the more impatient members suggested that Soros make his move now, while the target was caught off guard. What they didn't realize was that the person they were about to attack was actually Cain. Otherwise, they would have reconsidered their decision to be so aggressive. Slowpoke, teleport back to the position we were just at, Cain commanded once they had reached his ideal location. The blue light in Slowpoke's eyes flickered and enveloped the trio, and in a flash they were gone. Soros and the others, who had been following from a distance, simply followed Cain's footprints until they reached the spot where he had disappeared. Both Soros and Sky's expressions changed when they saw this. Damn, where did he go? Sky muttered as he examined the last 2 footprints Cain had left. Since Slowpoke had been floating with confusion, he hadn't left any footprints on the ground, so they didn't know that Cain had caught a new Pokémon. In their opinion, to survive this trial, they needed to focus their resources on just one Pokémon. Having more would be counterproductive. We've been discovered, Soros said solemnly, his face darkening as he remembered the devastating attack of Murkrow during the test. He motioned for his coughing to come closer, ready for any potential battle. One of the 5 men following behind stepped forward. Confusion etched on his face. What's going on, Soros? Soros gave him a blank stare and didn't answer, his mind consumed with the thought of Cain's sudden disappearance. Sky, standing nearby, explained, we lost our target. The man was visibly relieved, but Soros and Sky knew better. They didn't want to explain too much, for fear that Cain wasn't the type to take anything lying down. They could only hope that Cain wouldn't lash out when he realized there were a lot of them. At the same time, Cain reappeared at the spot where he first learned he was being followed. It seems the position of hunter and prey has been reversed, he mused, a grim smile on his face. Cain knew that bullying the few with the many worked well in most situations, but he was no ordinary man. He had learned long ago that in the face of absolute strength, numbers were not the key to victory or defeat, especially when one had the initiative. Aside from the tremendous progress that Cain's Pokémon had made during this half-month or so on the trial island, Cain had also benefited greatly as a trainer. He had exercised every day while his Pokémon were training, and his physical fitness had improved tremendously compared to before. Humans in the Pokémon world were much more physically fit than those on Earth, and they grew at a much faster rate. Cain's intense daily training, combined with dietary changes, had greatly strengthened his body during his time in the wilderness. Even though he didn't have bulging muscles all over his body, he was still able to completely crush Soros and the other trialists who were comfortably staying at Team Rocket's base. Thanks to Slowpoke's teleport, he didn't have to hold back any longer. And his familiarity with the forest only added to his advantages. Cain prowled through the trees and grass like a cheetah, his mind focused on his prey. He was confident that if he was fast enough, they would still be at the place he had teleported from. The grass there was so tall and thick that he would be able to catch them off guard as long as he maintained his stealth. The Pokémon in Soros' group were mostly Team Rocket's signature Pokémon. Soros had his Coughing, Sky had his Ekans, and the others had either a Rattata, Zubat, or Oddish. While the Pokémon weren't particularly powerful, they weren't a weak force when gathered together. But Cain was aware of their strength, and he knew that for them to have the audacity to go after him, it can only be said that greed makes a man blind and foolish, and makes him an easy prey for death. The group gradually spread out in search of where and why Cain had disappeared, with Sky reminding them to always maintain communication. But this, however, negated their numerical advantage and made things easier for Cain in what was to come. Get ready, it's time to start hunting, Cain whispered to Murkrow and Slowpoke as he pulled a dagger from his sheath. Chapter 44. With the swiftness of a shooting arrow, Cain propelled himself out of the tall grass, his body a blur as he glided through the field. At his feet, Slowpoke's confusion shone with a faint, ethereal glow, allowing him to move with stealth and silence. Murkrow soared just above the rustling grass, his beady eyes scanning the area for any signs of their quarry. Meanwhile, Slowpoke sent out tendrils of psychic energy, searching for any sign of the prey they sought. It wasn't long before Cain's keen eyes spotted their target, a lone figure who had strayed from the group, his mind consumed with thoughts of the supposed opportunity promised by Soros. He foolishly believed that with 7 of them on the hunt, their prey would not dare to fight back. But he was wrong, for the man they pursued was none other than Cain himself. Despite the danger, the man remained cautious, his Rattata by his side as a shield against any wild Pokémon that might cross their path. But Cain was not one to be underestimated. Without hesitation, he ordered Slowpoke to use confusion to immobilize both the man and his Pokémon. Then Murkrow swooped down, a black streak cutting through the grass. His wings flared with powerful flying energy. With a brilliant white light, he unleashed a wing attack on the hapless Rattata, killing it in seconds. The man's eyes widened in horror as he watched his Pokémon fall, but he was unable to speak. A whimper escaped his lips, his eyes pleading for mercy as he realized the true identity of the person they had dared to hunt. But Cain was not one to show mercy. With a cold, ruthless precision, he plunged his dagger into the man's throat, ending his life without a second thought. Even in death, the man could not understand how Cain had gotten so close, how he had been able to hold him in place and prevent him from escaping. With a swift, practiced motion, Cain wiped the blood from his dagger onto his clothes and calmly unbuckled the man's belt, slipping it into his own pouch. And with that, he melted back into the grass, a ghostly figure slipping seamlessly into the shadows. His actions were those of a seasoned killer, precise and unhesitating. I did not seek you out, but you have brought yourself to my doorstep, Cain thought coldly. If you are willing to kill, then you must also be willing to die. He had not yet shown his true strength to the trialists, but if they dared to dream of victory, he would give them a nightmare they would never forget. In the space of 5 minutes, Cain had struck again, taking out 2 more of his foes. Though his actions were swift and efficient, the commotion did not go unnoticed, and Soros and the others were quickly gathering to confront him. But Cain was not worried, for he knew that discovery was inevitable. It was not their strength that concerned him, but the fact that things would now be more difficult. With no time to lose, he rushed straight at the nearest of his enemies. This time, he did not bother to conceal himself, and the rustling of the grass gave away his position. Soros and the others quickly closed in, but before they could surround him, Cain had already intercepted one of their number, a man with an Oddish by his side. As Cain appeared before him, the man's expression turned from one of determination to one of horror. "How could it be you?" he exclaimed. Only now did he realize that the opportunity Soros and Sky had spoken of was none other than Cain himself, but it was too late for regret. The smell of blood hung heavy in the air, a testament to Cain's ruthless nature. "He's here," the man shouted, his voice filled with urgency as he immediately ordered his Oddish to use poison powder. But Cain was not caught off guard. He had been waiting for this moment, knowing that the man would call for help. With a small smirk on his lips, he gave the order to his Pokémon. "Murkrow, use Gust and send that poison powder back to them. Slowpoke, use Psychalk." In response to Cain's command, Murkrow flapped his wings, creating 2 small whirlwinds that enveloped the lavender powder from the Oddish and blew it back at the man. The man quickly tried to defend himself, rolling out of the way, but it was to no avail. A buzzing echoed in his mind, followed by silence as Slowpoke's powerful Psychalk took its toll, blood pouring from his orifices. With the added effect of type restraint, it was no surprise that both the man and his Oddish lay lifeless on the ground. At that moment, Soros and Sky appeared, along with their last remaining follower. The sight of his fallen companion was too much for the last follower. He had never imagined that following Soros on this mission would be so deadly. He had thought that with their numbers, they would be able to defend themselves against even the strongest of opponents. But he had also never expected to face someone like Cain. As he stared at the man who had decimated their group, confusion and fear warred in his mind. Why had Soros wanted to take on someone as dangerous as Cain? But Cain had no such doubts. He looked at Soros with a wicked smile on his face. "We meet again, Soros," he said with a hint of malice in his voice. Chapter 45. Soros' face turned ashen as he heard Cain speak. He had never expected this to happen. The sight of Murkrow flying overhead and the pink Slowpoke by Cain's side made everything clear. He had severely underestimated Cain, who had not only trained a powerful Pokémon, but had also taken in a second one, just as powerful. Comparing their strengths, Soros realized that his side was at a disadvantage. Spitting hatefully through clenched teeth, he spat, "We lost this time, let's go." But he was interrupted by Cain's mocking laugh. "Don't you think it's a little late to leave now? Murkrow, Gust." With those words, a whirlwind appeared behind them, blocking their path of retreat. Soros' eyes spit fire as he shouted, "Cain, don't go too far. If looks could kill, Cain would have died many times by now. Even Xander had never been so dismissive of him. "And what are you going to do about it?" Cain said, taking a step forward. "Caw." Murkrow cried out in support, as if ready to attack at any moment. Soros' face stiffened and he glanced at Sky, gesturing for him to do something. Cain, noticing this, took a closer look at the young man and his icons. Pokémon. Icons. Orange. Gender. Female. Level. 19. Type. Poison. Ability. Shed skin. Items held. None. Egg moves. Poison tail. Basic moves. Wrap. Empty. Poison sting. Bite. Blink. Screech. Taunt moves. Acid. Technological machines. TMs none. He was surprised that this young man had trained his icons to level 19 and was impressed by his calmness in this situation. This indicated that he possessed both strength and intelligence. "What's your name?" Cain asked casually. Startled by the question, Sky hesitated before answering. "Sky." With their disadvantage clear, it was best not to provoke Cain and to stall for time in hopes of finding a way to escape. Starting a fight now would be foolish, particularly in light of the nearby presence of their fallen comrade's corpse. They had underestimated Cain's power, thinking he only possessed a formidable Murkrow, and even then, they had hesitated before making a move. Now that they knew he also had an equally powerful Slowpoke, provoking him would mean certain death. Sky, taking in all the circumstances, could not think of a way out. He was disappointed that all his efforts to help Soros were for naught. But then, Cain spoke words that left them all in shock. "Are you interested in working for me?" The follower's ashen face lit up with hope, recognizing that working for Cain meant a chance at survival. He may not have been the brightest, but he knew he was being used by Soros and couldn't afford to oppose Cain. But it was Soros' expression that changed the most, his face shifting from red to green, from green to black, and then from black to white. The shock and anger evident in his eyes as he realized the gravity of the situation. Soros had not expected Cain to take the initiative to recruit Sky. He had been preparing to fight to the death alongside Sky, hoping to find a way out, but after Cain's words, his mind went blank. Sky, on the other hand, had the least change in expression, but his eyes remained fixed on Cain, trying to understand his true intentions, whether he truly wanted to recruit him or if it was just a distraction before killing them one by one. But even after a while, he couldn't read anything on Cain's face. Cain said nothing, he simply stared at Sky and waited for his answer. In fact, Cain's decision to recruit Sky was not made on a whim. As someone with a lifetime of experience in Team Rocket, he understood that one person could never get very far in such a large organization with so many factions. There were only two options: join an existing faction or create one from scratch. Although the latter was much more difficult, Cain had chosen to do it. If he wanted to have more resources, it was better to rely on himself. Even though he wouldn't be able to form his faction right away, that wouldn't stop him from making plans for the future. Besides, this trial was the best time to place his pieces on the board. In his previous life, before Xander joined Team Rocket, he had formed his own clique on this trial island, paving the way for his future development. And now, Cain wanted to form his own team, to be prepared even if he didn't need it in the future. Sky was chosen by Cain by chance, but he believed that if Sky was given a Pokémon with good aptitude, he would prove useful later. Without making Cain wait too long, Sky gritted his teeth and nodded. Yes. He couldn't say no in his current situation. If he did, he would end up dead. Soros's eyes blazed with red fury as he glared at Sky, but he did not hesitate to make his escape. Even with Sky by his side, they had never stood a chance against Cain. Cain sneered in contempt as he watched Soros flee. "Slowpoke Psyshock," he commanded, and his Pokémon unleashed a wave of psychic energy upon Soros. Coughing, block him. Soros growled, sacrificing his own Pokémon to protect himself. Gas, Coughing gave a moment's pause, but ultimately obeyed its trainer's command. It was common knowledge that psychic types held a powerful advantage over poison-type Pokémon. Thus it wasn't much of a surprise when Coughing let out a sorrowful moan before collapsing to the ground, powerless against Slowpoke's onslaught. Sky watched the scene with a mixture of fear and intrigue. He had reluctantly agreed to join Cain's team, but he had not expected such a display of power. Cain, sensing Sky's uncertainty, was confident in his ability to keep him under control. He had no need for loyalty, only obedience. Soros, desperate and alone, could not evade the fatal strike of Murkrow. And so, another corpse was added to the earth, forever lost. Cain, with a thoughtful glint in his eye, decided to spare the life of the last remaining individual. For in the construction of his team, he knew that relying solely upon Sky would not be enough. This person could serve as his loyal assistant. He approached Soros' lifeless body and looked into his wide, haunted eyes. With a deft motion, he unclipped Soros' Team Rocket belt and, after a moment's contemplation, took the Pokeball from his waist. Tapping the button on the Pokeball, he put away the unconscious coughing and tossed it to Sky. "From now on, this Pokemon is yours," Cain said, a hint of warning in his voice. "I hope you won't disappoint me." Sky stared at the Pokeball in shock, his mind reeling at the implications of what had just happened. This coughing with a dark yellow aptitude was far superior to his own orange aptitude Eakin's. "Is this for me?" he asked, unable to believe his luck. He could feel the envy emanating from the man standing next to him. Sky's hand closed tightly around the Pokeball, his fingers turning white with the effort. This was his chance, his ticket to the top. Cain watched him with a frown. "What's wrong? Can you not tame it?" he asked, knowing that a Pokemon's acceptance of a new trainer was not always easy. But he had faith in Sky's abilities. No, thank you very much," Sky stammered, bowing deeply. He didn't know how to address Cain. "Just call me Cain," he replied, his voice devoid of emotion. He didn't care for titles. "Yes, thank you, Cain," Sky responded, adjusting quickly to his new role. Cain nodded, pleased that he had found a new pawn in his game of power and ambition. He had always found the carrot-and-stick approach to be the most effective way of controlling his subordinates. He now turned his gaze to the man standing nearby, who had fallen into a trance-like state after the day's events. The death of all 4 of his companions, and of Soros, whom he had idolized, had taken its toll on him. Sky, the second in command, had betrayed Soros, and his own life was now in the hands of another. He was at a loss for what to do. Sky's eyes flickered and he gave the man a swift kick to bring him back to reality. The man, noticing the attention of both Cain and Sky, paled and stammered, "Boss, my name is Fox, my nickname is Fox. My Pokemon is a coughing. I am willing to pledge allegiance. Please, don't kill me." Cain, who had already scanned Fox's Pokemon, saw that it was a level 16 orange aptitude coughing, nothing special, but it was better than nothing. "From now on, you will follow Sky," Cain said impassively. Yes. Fox immediately bowed and let out a sigh of relief, as if he had been granted amnesty. Being a subordinate of Cain was surely a more reliable choice than following Soros. Chapter 46. "Sky," said Cain, his voice low and menacing. "When you return, you will begin recruiting for my cause. But heed my words, I'd rather have a villain within my ranks than suffer a hypocrite. As for those with good morals, they could forget about it. On Purgatory Island, only the strongest and most ruthless would survive, let alone join Team Rocket. I am no saint," he continued, his voice like a serpent's hiss. "My subordinates may have their flaws, but the only ones I cannot abide are those who would play the hypocrite, like that miserable worm Soros." Sky nodded, his face set in determination. Yes, Cain. With Cain's strength and potential, and Soros coughing, Sky knew they would be able to recruit those lone wolves. He had never thought that this disaster would turn out to be a blessing in disguise, for now he had not only survived, but also gained a Pokemon of good aptitude. The hand that held the Pokeball trembled with excitement, for Sky knew that under Cain's leadership, his own position in Team Rocket would surely rise. But for now, he pushed such thoughts aside, for there was much work to be done. Cain pondered for a moment, then carelessly tossed Soros' Team Rocket belt to Sky. "This should be all the resources you originally had. I'll leave them in your hands." Sky accepted the Team Rocket belt from Cain with a complicated expression. He and Soros had known each other since childhood, and their relationship was a complex one of both friendship and rivalry. It was just that Soros had always seemed to have the upper hand, his luck always seeming to be better than his own. But with one stroke of misfortune, he had stumbled into the eternal abyss. "And if the recruitment doesn't go smoothly, don't hesitate to give up," Cain said with a cool detachment, his piercing gaze fixed upon the young man. "Your primary task remains to tame the coughing and secure a favorable ranking in the next test." And with that, Cain turned on his heel and began to make his way deeper into the forest. Sky and Fox's safe return to base was of little concern to him. Murkrow and Slowpoke followed closely behind, their expressions stoic. They were not privy to the reasons behind Cain's decision to spare the lives of the 2 men who had initially been hostile to them, but as his Pokemon, they did not question their trainer's choices. As Cain disappeared from sight, Fox let out a long breath and sat down upon the ground, unfazed by the corpses that littered the area around him. Though Cain seemed amiable in conversation, Fox couldn't shake the feeling of suffocation that he experienced in his presence. "I can't see through him," Sky murmured, staring after Cain. Cain held little hope for the success of Sky and Fox. This was but an experiment, and whether the results were favorable or not, he would suffer no loss. What a headache, Cain muttered to himself, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. I've strayed from the path yet again. He had wandered from the main route and found himself in this verdant clearing, where he used the terrain to eliminate Soros and his associates one by one. I'll have to trouble you once more, Slowpoke, he said, turning to his Pokémon. Use your teleport to guide us back to the main route. Slowpoke nodded, and a blue light glimmered in his eyes. With a blinding flash, the three of them were enveloped in the light and disappeared. Well done, Slowpoke, Cain said as he opened his eyes, taking in his new surroundings. Slowpoke's teleport was a lifesaver in the wilderness, but it came with its limitations. Firstly, the distance that could be traversed depended on the strength of the Pokémon's psychic talent. The more powerful the Pokémon, the further it could teleport. Secondly, teleport could only transport one to places that one had previously visited, for only with a mental image of the location could one teleport to it. Thirdly, extraneous psychic abilities could interfere with teleport, causing spatial fluctuations and leading to errors before or during teleportation. And fourthly, the greater the distance to be traveled, the longer the casting time. This was logical because determining the correct coordinates that held psychic fluctuations was a time-consuming task. As Cain ventured forward, he knew that the first territory he would encounter would be that of the fierce and proud Scyther, a Pokémon that he had always held in high regard. They were a stark contrast to the ill-tempered Beedrill, as they would not normally strike first, but they were a force to be reckoned with if provoked. Despite the added security of Slowpoke's presence, Cain never let his guard down. And with good reason, as Murkrow and Slowpoke were forced to fend off several overconfident Pokémon who attempted to sneak up on them. Most Pokémon, however, avoided them after sensing the faint bloody aura emanating from their bodies. As they reached the area marked on the map as Scyther territory, Cain slowed his pace and soon encountered a group of around a dozen of the fierce Pokémon. The Scythers, preferring to battle opponents of comparable strength, spent their days sparring with one another in this part of the forest. As they watched the group sparring, the Scythers spotted the trio and stopped their training. A sturdy-looking Scyther, who appeared to be the leader, stepped forward with a solemn expression on his face. Cain's system quickly displayed the data of this Pokémon. Pokémon: Scyther, dark yellow. Sex: male. Level: 23. Type: bug plus flying. Ability: technician. Items held: none. Egg moves: stamina. Basic moves: quick attack, empty, focus energy, fury cutter, false swipe, agility, wing attack. Taunt moves: bug buzz, bug bite, vacuum wave. Technological machines: TMs none. Cain knew that this would be a difficult Pokémon to defeat, and a quick glance at the Scythers behind revealed that they were all above level 20. Murkrow's speed was his greatest asset, but against this Scyther, who also had a high speed stat, it would not give him much of an advantage. And even if the Scyther leader were to lose, Slowpoke's presence might not be enough to protect Cain from the rest of the pack. Some of these Scythers yearned for a fight, driven by a sense of threat from Murkrow and Slowpoke, and the thrill of the challenge. But the Scyther leader, wise and perceptive, saw more than the others. He sensed not only the danger from the two Pokémon, but also the human, who seemed to possess not a shred of fear. Anyone who could remain so composed in the face of danger was either naive enough not to understand the situation, or possessed true strength. A faint voice in the back of his mind warned him of the death and injury that would befall the majority of his pack should they attack. Though they loved to fight, the Scythers were not immune to fear of death. And so the Scyther leader wisely intervened, halting the rash ones and watching as Cain carefully led his Pokémon away from their territory. For the Scythers, strength was to be respected and acknowledged. Their own territory was earned through their belligerent nature, and as the other Pokémon in the area became frightened and gradually left, it became the domain of the Scythers alone. Chapter 47. As they ventured further into the island, Cain and his companions found themselves in a dense orchard, teeming with a tribe of Mankeys. These primate Pokémon were known for their fierce nature, and would attack any unsuspecting traveler who dared to enter their territory. At the heart of the tribe stood a powerful level 23 Mankey chief with a green aptitude, granting him the strength and leadership to rule over the tribe with an iron fist. His presence alone made him a formidable opponent, but coupled with the endless hordes of Mankeys under his command, he was truly a hegemon of the island. Cain's innocent mistake of allowing Murkrow to pluck a berry from the orchard incited the wrath of the Mankeys. In their minds, any intrusion on their territory was a threat to their food supply, and they launched a merciless attack on the trio. Murkrow and Slowpoke fought bravely, but the sheer number of Mankeys proved to be overwhelming. In the end, they were forced to retreat, leaving behind a trail of destruction. Despite the grueling battle, the experience proved to be a valuable one. Murkrow and Slowpoke had leveled up, with Murkrow reaching level 19 and Slowpoke reaching level 21. Their mastery of their respective flying and psychic-type moves had also increased significantly. As they set up camp for the night, they reflected on the day's events. Slowpoke's talent had been gradually recovering, and after the battle, his original dark green aptitude had returned, a small order higher than Murkrow's. His control over his psychic energy had also improved, making him an even more formidable opponent. Murkrow, inspired by his companion's progress, was eager to push himself further and requested Cain to increase his weight training load by 10 kilograms. However, after some persuasion from Cain, he reluctantly agreed to a more modest increase of 5 kilograms. Cain understood Murkrow's ambition, but he knew that such drastic changes could lead to unforeseen problems and potential injuries. He had heard of cases where highly talented Pokémon were not treated properly after a battle, and as a result, they were left with hidden injuries that hindered their performance and left them unable to reach their full potential. These types of injuries were notoriously difficult to treat, often requiring extensive rehabilitation and conditioning. And during this time, the Pokémon were unable to train or fight, meaning that even if they eventually recovered, they would never be able to return to their peak form. With this in mind, Cain decided to increase Murkrow's load by a more manageable 5 kilograms, bringing it to a total of 10 kilograms. This change would have little impact on Murkrow's fighting ability, while also minimizing the risk of injury. The following day, Cain found himself facing the most formidable group of Pokémon he had encountered so far. The group, consisting of only 5 Pokémon, was led by a level 32 Nidoking and a level 30 Nidoqueen, with the remaining 3 members being their children. Despite their small number, they held a large territory that included a natural lake and an emerald green meadow, home to a variety of berries and docile Pokémon. The lake was also home to a large number of fish, which served as their main source of food. The Nidoking and Nidoqueen's self-sufficient nature and formidable strength made them the undisputed rulers of their territory, and it was rare that they were ever bothered by other Pokémon. So, when Cain stumbled upon the group, he couldn't help but be intrigued. The fact that there was a Nidoking and Nidoqueen present in this area led him to suspect that it might be a location where the elusive Moonstone, required for their evolution, could be found. Determined to investigate further, Cain approached the group's home at the small lake with caution. But before he could get too close, he was discovered by the Nidoking who, incensed by the intrusion, launched an attack on Cain and his Pokémon. With the help of Murkrow's Protect, they managed to escape unharmed, but Cain knew that he would have to return when he was stronger. Nidoking alone had sent them running, and Nidoqueen, who had been busy guarding the Nidorans, had not even bothered to intervene. It was no surprise to Cain that the Mankey tribe was too intimidated to challenge the authority of Nidoking and Nidoqueen, with such power at their disposal. Cain and his companions arrived at a stone forest after crossing their territory. Checking the map in his hand, Cain muttered to himself, "As long as we pass through, we'll reach the mission site." Cain let out a deep sigh of relief as he surveyed the rocky landscape before him. They had traveled far to reach this spot, and now the most pressing matter at hand was to prepare a nourishing meal for his trusty companions, Murkrow and Slowpoke, who deserved a well-earned rest. The terrain was a harsh one, with jagged rocks littering the ground, and only patches of withered grass and dry straw providing any respite from the barrenness. But Cain was undeterred. He spied a large, flat boulder and, setting to work, he quickly constructed a fire using the rocks that lay scattered about. With a makeshift stove in place, he placed a small pot upon it and carefully poured in water from the nearby lake. For, in the wilds, one must be ever vigilant. Drinking raw water, no matter how pure it may appear, was a risk not worth taking. The dangers of contracting an illness in such a remote place, without the proper medicine, were all too real. As the water began to boil, Cain set about preparing their lunch. Murkrow's meal consisted of a medley of pokeblocks and a freshly caught hare, while Slowpoke's plate was piled high with his favorite fish. Slowpoke, ever helpful, assisted Cain in preparing the hare and fish, and when they were finished, they covered the entrails and blood with mud, to keep wild Pokémon from being attracted by the smell. The water had boiled by this time and was left to cool before Cain could refill his water bottle. As he tended to his equipment, he began grilling the meat, brushing it with oil, turning it over, and sprinkling it with spices that left such a tantalizing aroma that both Murkrow and Slowpoke couldn't stop their mouths from watering. Cain himself needed only a leg of the hare and half a fish to satisfy his hunger. The rest was for his Pokémon companions. The meal was soon devoured, and with bellies full and spirits high, they set out once more on their journey. The journey through the stone forest was a far cry from the treacherous trek through the overgrown woods, where every step had to be taken with the utmost caution, lest one fall into a hidden pit. But while the visibility was greatly improved amidst the towering stone pillars, the terrain was still uneven, and the constant presence of Geodudes was a constant reminder of the danger that lurked around every corner. But the Geodudes seemed content to ignore the travelers, content to spend their afternoons standing motionless upon a pile of rocks. Cain noticed that most of these Pokémon were of a low level, none above 20. With the path clear and no Pokémon taking the initiative to attack them, the trio made quick progress, covering half the distance of the stone forest in just under an hour. It seemed they would soon reach their destination. But as they say, life is full of surprises, and their path was suddenly blocked by a Pokémon. It wasn't even deliberately trying to impede their advance, it simply blocked their path due to its massive size. Pokémon. Onyx. Dark yellow. Gender. Male. Level. 30. Type. Rock plus ground. Ability. Sturdy. Held items. None. Egg moves. Defense curl. Rock climb. Basic moves. Mud sport. Tackle. Harden. Bind. Curse. Rock throw. Rock tomb. Rage. Stealth rock. Rock polish. Euroball. Smackdown. Dragon breath. Slam. Taunt moves. Iron head. Technical machines. TMs none. This Onyx was lounging against a massive boulder, its massive form blocking their path, and the only way to get past would be to climb over it, an action that could only lead to certain disaster. And if they were to take a detour, there was no telling how far they would have to walk, as the path was surrounded on both sides by endless high stone walls. Cain couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. The stone forest was known to be a resource-poor area, and as such, there were no powerful groups of Pokémon to be found in the region. Only Geodude and Onyx thrived here, as they had no need for other resources as long as there were mineral-rich rocks, which were their favorite and the most abundant. But as Cain had not encountered any high-level Geodude along the way, he couldn't help but wonder why this level 30 Onyx was here. As he studied the Onyx, who was basking comfortably in the sun, a plan began to form in his mind. Slowpoke, he said, his eyes alight with determination. Use rain dance on that Onyx. Slowpoke nodded and opened his mouth slightly, emitting a murmuring sound with a unique melody. And as Slowpoke's murmuring voice reached the sky, a wisp of black clouds appeared, gathering above the Onyx. Emo. The Onyx shivered as the temperature around him dropped. As he opened his eyes, he saw that the previously blazing sun had vanished, replaced by a dark cloud looming above him. Onyx looked around warily, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. But as he gazed back up at the ominous clouds above him, he knew that they were targeting him specifically, for the sun was still shining a few dozen meters away. Despite his massive size, Onyx was of a naive disposition, and he didn't give much thought to the situation. As the first raindrops began to fall, the reluctant Onyx finally stirred from his spot. Though this was his favorite place to sunbathe, and he had grown accustomed to lying here, it was the rain that irritated him the most. The perpetrators of this rain, Cain and Slowpoke, hid behind a stone pillar and watched from a distance as Onyx scurried away, leaving an open path in his wake. As the rumbling faded and Onyx was no longer visible, Cain signaled for Slowpoke to stop using rain dance. The dark clouds quickly dissipated, leaving only a small puddle on the ground to indicate what had just transpired. After several tense minutes of waiting, with no sign of Onyx in sight, Cain approached the path, with Murkrow and Slowpoke by his side. The path ahead rose steeply, disappearing into the clouds and revealing a glimpse of the horizon beyond. As they trudged onward, the initial warmth of the sun began to fade, replaced by a chill that seemed to seep into their bones. The air grew dry and arid, and with every step, the signs of life around them grew fewer and farther between, until there was not a blade of grass to be seen. It was then, to Cain's surprise, that he spotted a dark and dreary cave, nestled amidst the towering stone pillars. The cave was low and narrow, no more than 2 meters high and 3 meters wide. For a moment, Cain was stunned, wondering how such a cave could have come to exist in this place, and by the looks of it, it had been there for a long time. Chapter 48. Can you make out any Pokémon in there, Slowpoke? Cain queried as they approached the cave, its entrance marred by faint scratch marks that spoke of excavation. It was clear that this was a cave had been dug out by a Pokémon, but the marks were not of the kind left behind by Geodude or Onyx. Slowpoke's eyes glowed slightly as he emitted invisible psychic fluctuations, searching for any signs of life within. A moment later, he shook his head at Cain, indicating that he had not sensed the presence of any Pokémon. Cain mused, pulling a flashlight from his Team Rocket belt and shining it directly into the cave. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped inside, with Murkrow landing on Slowpoke and floating alongside them with the help of the psychic Pokémon's powers. As they ventured deeper into the cave, Cain noticed that it was gradually expanding and quickened his pace. But despite reaching the end in a mere 5 minutes, there was nothing to see but rocks. Strange, is this really just a normal cave? He muttered to himself as he surveyed the scene before him. Just then, Slowpoke called out to Cain, pointing in a certain direction. Cain's heart skipped a beat as he moved in the direction Slowpoke had indicated, and there he found a large stalactite hanging from the dark cave ceiling. A drop of milky white sticky liquid clung to its round tip, not dripping down. This drop of milky fluid gave off a refreshing scent that lasted less than a meter before dissipating into the air. No wonder Cain hadn't smelled it at first. Is this geocentric cleansing milk? Cain couldn't help but wonder, for it was a heavenly treasure in the Pokémon world, known for its rich energy and minerals that could boost a Pokémon's attack and defense when taken alone, and its effects would increase exponentially when combined with various ingredients to make Pokeblocks. Even humans could drink geocentric cleansing milk to increase their strength and vitality, prevent illness, and live longer. This was a rare and precious substance, sought after by Team Rocket and powerful families and factions alike for its life-prolonging properties. Cain remembered, from his previous life, the frenzied rush to acquire a batch when it appeared on Team Rocket's exchange list. It was snatched up in less than a minute, and at a price of 1,000 Team Rocket points per drop. A single drop can take several months to condense, Cain sighed. It's a shame it's still a little too early. But then, as Slowpoke concentrated on inspecting the ground, a blue light flickered in his eyes and a stone the size of a pot lid was lifted. At once, a strong scent wafted out, and with a single breath, Cain, Murkrow, and Slowpoke felt their bodies relax. The stalactite hanging above them was directly over a small puddle of geocentric cleansing milk, and the drop stuck to its tip finally broke free with Slowpoke's slight movement and fell into the puddle below. The initially calm surface rippled, but there was no splash. Cain was taken aback by the scene before him, never expecting to see so much geocentric cleansing milk coalescing here. He gulped unconsciously as he stared at the milky white liquid, which emitted rays of starlight. Cain finally came to his senses and hastily took some bottles and containers from his belt, had them washed by Slowpoke and dried by Murkrow. He then took out a spoon used to make Pokeblocks and slowly filled the containers with the geocentric cleansing milk. However, as he filled a glass jar, he noticed a Pokémon egg in the middle of the puddle. Who knew how long the geocentric cleansing milk had been collecting, or when the Pokémon egg had been placed here? Cain thought back to the scratch marks he had seen all over the cave. Could it be that a Pokémon placed this Pokémon egg here? He wondered, his heart stirring slightly. But it's been so long that this Pokémon egg must have died already. Nevertheless, he didn't rush, instead continuing to steadily fill the containers. As the vats gradually filled and the puddle gradually disappeared, the Pokémon egg was finally revealed in its entirety. And soon, the full data of the Pokémon egg appeared before Cain's eyes, revealing a surprise that he never could have predicted. Pokémon, Larvitar, egg form, non-hatchable, blue, gender, male, level 1, type, rock plus ground, ability, unknown, held items, geocentric cleansing milk, egg moves, dragon dance, outrage, ancient power, stealth rock, basic moves, bite, leer. Taught moves, none. Technical machines, TMs none. Dumbfounded, the spoon in Cain's hand clattered to the ground as he stared in shock at the Pokémon egg's data. He could hardly believe that the Pokémon egg was actually of a Larvitar, but it would explain the scratch marks and the size of the cave. Looking at this Larvitar egg's moves, dragon dance and outrage, one could only imagine how strong and talented its parents were. A pseudo-legendary Pokémon with a blue aptitude. In his previous life, Cain had owned a pseudo-legendary Pokémon, but it wasn't a Larvitar, and it was because of that Pokémon that he had risen to the level of a quasi-elite trainer. What does it mean by non-hatchable? It was the first time he had seen this message after using the system for so long. If the Pokémon egg was dead, it was normal that it couldn't be hatched, but now it seemed that the Pokémon egg's life force was intact, even a little too strong, which was confusing. Cain placed a piece of cloth on the ground before carefully removing the Pokémon egg from the puddle and placing it on the cloth. He noticed that the smooth Pokémon egg emitted a faint glow, almost identical to the geocentric cleansing milk. Murkrow and Slowpoke also leaned over, and as Pokémon, their feelings were even clearer. The presence of the little creature inside the egg was obvious, but for some reason, a wave of sadness seemed to emanate from it. Slowpoke leaned his pink round head gently against the egg, and Cain understood what he was trying to do. After a while, Slowpoke tugged at Cain's pants and motioned for him to put his hand on his back and for Murkrow to do the same. And in an instant, the scene changed before their eyes, revealing a mystery that Cain never could have imagined. Chapter 49. The once gloomy cave was now a sun-kissed meadow, where the sweet trill of birds echoed among the blooms of vibrant flowers. But just as the peacefulness settled over the lush landscape, a massive creature emerged from the shadows. With armor as pale as spring grass, the creature marched forward, and with each step, the meadow withered into a desolate wasteland, yellow sand whipping about in the bitter wind. The scenery changed once again, and there, among the sand dunes, Tyranitar found a quiet spot to rest. For a month, she remained motionless, without food or drink, her violent nature subdued. But peace was not to be found in this desert. Just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, a pack of houndoms appeared, their eyes set upon the vulnerable Tyranitar. With a fierce cry, they descended upon the beast, and yet, in her moment of greatest weakness, the Tyranitar rose to her feet to face the invaders head-on. It was then, as the dust settled, that a deep pit was revealed. Within the pit lay a Pokémon egg that shone with a warm, green light. And as it turned out, the Tyranitar had been there for a month, not to rest, but to bring forth this egg, to bring forth her child. The desert was home to the unyielding might of Tyranitar. The battle that raged there, against a horde of houndoms, tested even her mighty strength, but she emerged victorious, even as wounds marred her form. Yet in the heat of the fight, the pseudo-legendary Pokémon had not been able to keep watch over her precious offspring. Upon her return to the pit where she had rested for a month, she was met with a sight that shattered her heart into a million pieces. The egg, the embodiment of her future, was cracked and its life force was fading. Tyranitar's motherly instincts took over, and through the tears that streamed down her face, she knelt beside the egg, determined to protect it. She did not rest until dawn broke, when she rose with a newfound resolve, cradling the fragile egg in her arms, and setting out on a journey to save her child. Alongside her, Cain was a silent witness to her struggle. He could feel her body growing weaker with each step, but her spirit remained unbreakable. Her eyes reflected the guilt she felt for not being able to protect her child, but her determination was unwavering. As they entered a stone forest, familiar to Cain, Tyranitar's gait may have been unsteady, but her aura of power still commanded respect from all those who crossed her path. And as they approached the towering cliffs that rose into the clouds, a hint of joy shone in her eyes once again. Tyranitar, a powerful rock and dark-type Pokémon, was blessed with a heightened sensitivity to rock-type energies that surrounded her. And as she approached a small cave, her instincts were set ablaze by a faint flicker of power that seemed to be emanating from within. Due to her massive size, the entrance was too small for her to fit through, but she was not to be deterred. With one hand cradling her precious egg and the other clawing at the rock face, she carved a passage through the stubborn stone, slicing it apart as though it were made of soft cheese. Her heart raced as she felt a pull towards the source of the power, leading her to a pool of geocentric cleansing milk. The sight of the magical liquid filled her with excitement, as she knew it was the key to saving her struggling child. As she tenderly placed the egg into the pool, she held her breath, watching as the milk submerged the shell, enveloping it completely. The once smooth surface of the egg, now rough and dull, had come to life once again under the influence of the geocentric cleansing milk. Cain, who had never experienced the love of a parent, was awestruck by the sight of a mother's love. Despite the exhaustion that weighed upon her from the battles fought and the journey taken, Tyranitar watched on with hope in her heart as she saw her child's life force slowly start to recover. Tyranitar's love for her offspring was unconditional, and even in her weakened state, her spirit was unbreakable, driven by the maternal instincts that lay within her. With a determined expression, Tyranitar summoned the last of her waning strength to cover the sacred pool with a heavy stone. She fell to the ground, exhausted but relieved, knowing that her precious child was safe and secure within the nurturing embrace of the geocentric cleansing milk. As a rock-type Pokémon, she knew that a single sip would restore her health and even increase her powers, but Tyranitar's maternal love was stronger than any thirst for power. She would not risk her child's survival for her own selfish desires. "Live well, my child," she thought, as she closed her eyes for the final time. As time passed, her body crumbled into a pile of rocks waiting for the day her child would hatch. And as the final moments of Tyranitar's tale faded, Cain's eyes fluttered open, as if roused from a dream. Slowpoke, with his psychic energy, had reached into the heart of the Pokémon egg to communicate with the remnants of Tyranitar's lingering obsession, bridging the gap between past and present and allowing them to bear witness to this tale. Cain's face was etched with a mixture of emotions as he felt the unyielding love of a mother pour forth from the egg. Slowpoke and Murkrow, who had stood by Cain's side during this emotional experience, had tears in their eyes. But with a shake of their heads and a deep breath, they regained their composure. Chapter 50. Cain knelt down beside a rock, the chill seeping into his hand as he placed it upon the rough surface. Yet, there was a strange sense of solace that seemed to pervade the very rock itself. He dismissed the fanciful notion and gingerly lifted the larvitar egg, his gaze fixated upon the crack that marred its once flawless exterior. And yet, to his profound amazement, the fissure had been mended, seamlessly sealed with a layer of the rare geocentric cleansing milk. Cain couldn't help but marvel at the wonders of Mother Nature that had brought him to this moment and this precious egg. He felt the stirring of the larvatar's life force within the shell, and whispered a prayer of thanks. It had been a twist of fate that had led Cain to this spot, and he couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. The geocentric cleansing milk had given the egg new life, and should it hatch, the larvatar's talent for rock-type energy would be off the charts. Yet, the potency of the milk had proven too great, its energy melding with the egg over the years and rendering hatching near impossible. With a heavy heart, Cain implored Slowpoke to guard the egg, vowing to explore every avenue in his quest to bring the larvatar into the world. Then he set about collecting the geocentric cleansing milk from the puddle, filling 10 gleaming glass vessels to the very brim. The precious liquid would bring untold wealth, be it through trade or sale, and with its power, Cain would have the means to unlock the full potential of his Pokémon, a virtuous cycle perpetuated by strength. Not a single drop would be squandered. As Cain gazed upon the 10 bottles of shimmering geocentric cleansing milk, he was aware that their worth, converted into Team Rocket points, would approach 1,000,000. Yet, he refused to surrender their secrets, for wealth was a fleeting notion, ephemeral in comparison to the permanence of strength. Until he was strong enough, he would keep his treasures hidden, safeguarded from prying eyes. His heart swelled with excitement as he envisioned the day when he'd have his 6 main Pokémon at the ready for battle. But he wouldn't settle for just any Pokémon. Only those that met his strict criteria of talent and personality would make the cut. As he secured the bottles within his Team Rocket belt, Cain felt a rush of pride. These treasures were worth the journey he'd made to obtain them. And he'd heard stories that the geocentric cleansing milk could amplify the powers of rock and ground-type Pokémon to levels beyond imagination. A tempting thought crossed his mind to seek out such a Pokémon, but he pushed it aside. He had a mission to complete, and he wouldn't be swayed by his desires. If fate presented him with a rock or ground-type Pokémon of extraordinary talent, he'd consider it, but he wouldn't force the issue. The Pokémon he'd encountered thus far were not what he was searching for, but still, he held on to a flicker of hope. If only the larvatar egg could hatch, it would be the perfect candidate. With determination in his heart, Cain retrieved the Pokémon egg incubator he had prepared from his belt. As Cain journeyed through the rugged terrain of Trial Island, he couldn't help but ponder the mysterious fate of the unhatched larvatar egg in his possession. Though it slept soundly now, he was determined to find a way to awaken it from its slumber. He knew that with the potent geocentric cleansing milk coursing through its veins, the creature within would be a force to be reckoned with. Slowpoke carried the incubator using confusion, while Murkrow flapped alongside Cain as they made their way towards their destination. Through the trials of their journey, Cain came to understand why the Geodudes in this region were not as strong as he had hoped. The presence of the geocentric cleansing milk had absorbed all the energy and minerals from the surrounding rocks, and inadvertently making that place a haven for the onyx that basked nearby in the sun's warmth. Cain was a man who seized every opportunity to gain an advantage, and this mission was no exception. If he could successfully complete it, he would prove himself worthy of joining the elite Shadow Unit. And so, after 5 long days, Cain finally arrived at the cave where his mission was set to take place. He couldn't help but smile as he gazed upon the entrance, for it seemed as though he was destined to explore the many caves of Purgatory Island. Despite his reservations, he stepped forward, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Chapter 51. The ground beneath their feet was slick with moss, causing a distinct squelch with each step Cain took, as they made their way deeper into the cave. One misstep could send him tumbling, so he had to be cautious. Suddenly, Slowpoke let out a piercing cry, his eyes blazing blue as he prepared for attack. Cain was instantly on alert, his senses heightened by the eerie stillness that pervaded the air. Unlike the previous cave, this one was not as chilly, but rather a warm, damp, and humid environment that many a Pokémon called home. Yet, as they ventured forth, not a single Pokémon was in sight. Then, from the shadows emerged a strange, black creature, its body no bigger than a ball. 2 large, glowing eyes took up most of its face, with fangs bared in a menacing grin. A purple gas surrounded it, casting an eerie aura. It was a ghastly, a mischievous ghost and poison-type Pokémon, always up for a practical joke. Slowpoke, a psychic-type Pokémon, had felt its presence before and warned it away. Murkrow flapped his wings, clearing some of the gas as it stood guard in front of Cain. As a dark-type Pokémon, it held a natural aversion to ghost types. Ghastly, however, was not intimidated by the warnings of Slowpoke and Murkrow. Instead, it let out a maniacal cackle, followed by a wide grin. What recklessness, Cain sighed, watching the ghastly's antics. Slowpoke was ordered to capture it, and with a flick of an invisible hand, the level 16 ghastly was caught. It was shocked to be trapped, for no Pokémon had ever touched its gaseous form. The sensation of the invisible grip was foreign and uncomfortable, like fire meeting water. Ghastly let out a series of pained cries, its haunting screams echoing through the cave. "Jia Jia," it cried out, over and over again. The deafening screams of Ghastly filled the air as a new Ghastly materialized, its glowing eyes fixed on Cain, Murkrow, and Slowpoke. Despite its hostile gaze, it hung back, seemingly repelled by the mysterious energy disturbances radiating from the group. As more and more Ghastlies gathered, Cain's grin widened. "Who'd have thought we'd stumble upon a Ghastly lair?" he exclaimed. Fearless in the face of their overwhelming numbers, Cain was confident in the protection offered by Slowpoke's Psychic-type moves and Murkrow's Dark-type moves, not to mention their capacity for teleportation. Murkrow let out a warning caw, while Slowpoke's cute exterior belied the ferocity he displayed when confronted by Ghastlies. Even the leading Ghastlies quailed at the sight of the fearsome duo. Suddenly, the Ghastlies parted, making way for a distinctive Ghastly to approach. As it floated forward, the rest fell silent. "Greetings, young human boy," a wise ancient voice echoed in Cain's mind. He was taken aback to find that the Ghastly was communicating telepathically, its eyes alight with a faint black light. "Is that you speaking?" Cain asked. The old Ghastly nodded, and Cain heard its voice once again in his head. "Human, your companions are powerful, but it would be unwise for either of us to engage in combat." Cain listened intently as the old Ghastly spoke, nodding in agreement as he scanned the data before him. Pokémon. Ghastly. Yellow. Gender. Male. Level. 28. Type. Ghost plus poison. Ability. Levitate. Held items. None. Egg moves. Scary face. Disable. Basic moves. Mean look, curse, nightshade, confuse ray, sucker punch, payback. Taunt moves. Astonish. Psywave. Smog. Foul play. Technical machines. TMs none. As Cain gazed upon the Ghastly before him, a thought crossed his mind. Level 28 and still a Ghastly? He mused quietly. "I must venture inside to find something," Cain announced with a serious tone. "I'll leave as soon as I've found it." There was no need to beat around the bush with the elderly Ghastly, so Cain spoke his intentions plainly. "We can grant you passage if you do us a small favor, and we can even assist you in your search," old Ghastly proposed. "Fear not, it shall be a simple task." Cain considered the offer, for the cave was dark and vast, and he had no idea how long it would take him to locate what he sought. Still, Cain declared confidently, "If I wish to enter, you cannot stop me." Old Ghastly weighed the consequences of a potential battle before finally replying, "We can reward you generously." Having lived for nearly 1,000 years, old Ghastly was well acquainted with the greed of humans. He believed they would do anything for a hefty reward. "No," Cain declared, clearly not interested in a bribe. Before old Ghastly could say more, Cain interrupted, a smirk playing at his lips as he motioned to Slowpoke. "Rather than that, teach him telepathy." Old Ghastly was taken aback. He expected the human to demand a hefty sum, not this strange request. Telepathy was a difficult skill to master, even for a ghost type that had lived for millennia. But psychic-type Pokémon were a different story. They were among the most intelligent species in the Pokémon world, possessing both immense psychic powers and a wisdom comparable to that of humans. The Ghastly knew that the pink Slowpoke next to the human was a psychic type, and its psychic talent seemed formidable. So he was puzzled as to why it couldn't use telepathy. Chapter 52. That same doubt had also plagued Cain. Why was it taking Slowpoke so long to master telepathy when his psychic talent was so strong? And then, as fate would have it, he encountered an ancient Ghastly who was capable of teaching Slowpoke the art of telepathy. "Very well," old Ghastly replied, for teaching telepathy to a willing Pokémon was a simple task for one of his experience. It was also pleased that Cain didn't press for any further requests, for the truth was, old Ghastly and his kin feared a full-on battle with Cain and his Pokémon, as they knew the damage it would inflict upon their clan would be catastrophic. Additionally, what they needed from Cain was something they could not achieve on their own. "In my many years dwelling on this land, I have seen few humans, but not long ago, one came to visit. This human was powerful, more powerful than you," old Ghastly remembered, his voice trembling at the recollection. "I only dared to observe him from a distance, but I had the distinct feeling that he was aware of my presence." Cain listened on, his expression unchanging. "He placed an object at the center of our cave and disappeared," old Ghastly continued. "At first, we thought nothing of it, but soon the object began to absorb all the ghost energy that filled our home, leaving us with no choice but to flee to the edge of the cave." Cain, his face impassive, asked, "Why didn't you destroy it or remove it?" "That, my friend, is what we ask of you. We cannot get near it, but you can," old Ghastly answered. Cain was taken aback. "You expect me to retrieve it when so many of you have failed? Follow me, You shall comprehend when you lay eyes upon it, old Ghastly declared with a sigh, leading the way into the cavern's maze. The surrounding Ghastlies reluctantly stepped aside for Cain's passage, their frightening expressions never leaving their faces. Cain, with Slowpoke and Murkrow close at his heels, cautiously followed old Ghastly. The labyrinthine cave was a perplexing network of twists and turns, but finally, they reached a relatively empty chamber. A ghostly light illuminated the room, and Cain could see a dim greenish glow coming from the walls and floor. Old Ghastly stopped at the entrance to the cavern, his voice quivering. Once, this place was full of ghost energy, ample enough for our entire clan to thrive. Some of our kin even evolved to become haunters. But since the cursed object was placed upon the altar, our powers have diminished and even the haunters have regressed. Cain knew it was dangerous when a Pokémon evolves and then de-evolves, since that can weaken its foundation and talent. He peered into the cavern, the fluorescent light casting eerie shadows, and saw a Pokeball on a dilapidated stone altar at the center of the room. Could that be the mission item? He thought. With a determined expression, Cain took the lead, with Slowpoke and Murkrow close behind. Old Ghastly was unable to step foot any further, but Cain trusted in his words. After all, Pokémon were more straightforward and honest than humans. Although old Ghastly had picked up the ability to converse like a human and had gained some understanding of their ways, he was still primarily a Pokémon and therefore couldn't shake off his inherent habits that remained ingrained in his very being. Another reason was his confidence in his own strength and the assurance that he could use Slowpoke's teleport to make a quick escape if required. Stepping forward with a composed demeanor, Cain approached the stone altar. The moment he was within range, his system scanned the Pokeball emblazoned with Team Rocket's unmistakable R emblem. Pokémon, Gengar. Light blue. Gender. Male. Level. 48. Type. Ghost plus poison. Ability. Cursed body. Held items. None. Egg moves. Scary face. Fire punch. Astonish. Taunt. Basic moves. Hypnosis. Lick. Spite. Mean look. Curse. Nightshade. Confuse ray. Sucker punch. Payback. Shadow ball. Dream eater. Dark pulse. Taunt moves. Snatch. Foul play, Giga Drain. Technical machines, TM's Rest, Protect, Sleep Talk, Toxic, Hidden Power, Water, Thunderbolt. With a sharp inhale, Cain's breath caught at the sight of the Pokémon's data. Is that Umbra's Gengar? He muttered. No wonder it could effortlessly overpower the clan in absorbing ghost energy. His thoughts then moved onto the impressive array of moves the ghost Pokémon possessed, each move representing a significant investment of resources. Besides Viper, Umbra was the only one on the island capable of having such a formidable Pokémon, and as the mission he had assigned Cain implied, it was almost certain to be his own Gengar. However, Cain couldn't help but ponder that Gengar's level indicated it was not a part of Umbra's main team, but rather one of his secondary Pokémon. As Cain picked up the Pokeball containing Gengar, a dense cloud of black mist drifted out from the altar. Goodness, such concentrated energy, Cain marveled. The mist was absorbed into the Pokeball, and through its semi-transparent surface, Cain watched as Gengar consumed the energy, its stats showing subtle improvement. What is Umbra's purpose in keeping Gengar here? Cain wondered. Is it to increase its level or heal an injury? No other reason came to mind. Cain wasn't so foolish as to believe that Umbra had placed Gengar here specifically to test him. On top of that, his curious mind couldn't help but ponder the source of the powerful ghost energy that seemed to emanate from the stone altar before him. He toyed with the idea of smashing it to see what lay within, but ultimately decided against it. For one, old Ghastly was watching him intently, fearful that Cain would do something to affect their home. The stone altar was their lifeline, the source of their sustenance, the generator of the ghost energy that allowed them to survive. If Cain were to destroy it, the Ghastlies would be doomed, with half their clan perishing and the rest facing a life of hunger and decline. No, Cain wouldn't risk a battle to the death with the Ghastlies just to satisfy his curiosity. Furthermore, even Umbra, who needed all that energy, had not dared to touch the altar. If a powerful individual such as Umbra was wary, it was better for Cain, a fresh new trainer, to exercise caution. So he let the ghost energy swirl around him, and resigned himself to wait for another opportunity to discover its secrets. With a quiet sigh, Cain shrunk the Pokeball containing Gengar and secured it in a compartment on his belt. Old Ghastly floated closer, seeing Cain put away the Pokeball, and basked in the ghost energy that surrounded them both. Thank you, young human, Old Ghastly exclaimed, grateful for Cain's assistance. Meanwhile, Slowpoke had become uneasy, and Cain, noticing his discomfort, invited Old Ghastly to step outside the cavern for a chat. Old Ghastly twirled about and followed Cain, and as soon as they stepped out, Slowpoke's tense body relaxed. No sooner did old Gasselty's voice resound in Cain's mind. So, young human, now that you've fulfilled your end of the bargain, what is it that you seek? Old Ghastly's tone was filled with anticipation. He was eager to see Cain depart, as he himself was struggling against the temptation to re-enter the cavern and absorb the ghost energy that he had been starved of for so long. Cain raised an eyebrow at old Ghastly's inquiry. He had not expected the ghost to be so interested in his own search, but now that he had gotten what he wanted, old Ghastly was asking about his motives. After giving it some thought, Cain decided to be bold and simply ask, "Have you ever come across a palm-sized stone that holds an immense amount of energy, regardless of its type, be it fire, water, electric, or any other?" Chapter 53. Cain was already content with having achieved his goal effortlessly and providing Slowpoke a chance to learn telepathy. He was now just attempting a long shot. However, to his utter disbelief, old Ghastly appeared surprised and then brought out 2 pitch-black stones. "Might you be speaking of these stones?" it queried. Cain was taken aback as he saw the gaseous hands of old Ghastly materialize in the air, each clutching a dusk stone. He could barely muster a word, never once imagining that old Ghastly possessed such treasures. Murkrow was the first to stir, letting out a soft squawk upon beholding the 2 dusk stones. He couldn't help but feel a strange tug at his heart, a longing for those mysterious stones. Some instinct deep within him whispered that they held the key to greater strength, to a transformative change. Despite not understanding the source of this feeling, Murkrow pecked at Cain's pants, signifying his desire for the stones. "I know, Murkrow," Cain whispered, crouching down to stroke the bird's feathers. "But there's no need to be hasty. Now is not the time to make use of these stones." Murkrow listened to Cain's words and slowly began to calm. He trusted Cain, knowing that following his guidance would bring him to greater heights, not harm. And so, he quashed the racing thoughts that threatened to consume him. Cain understood the inner turmoil that racked Murkrow's heart. It was a primal urge, a deep-seated instinct, for the avian to acquire the dusk stone and evolve into the mighty Haunchcrow. But Cain had other plans for Murkrow, as the feathered companion was not yet ready to undergo evolution. Such a hasty transformation would be a waste of his abundant talent. "Right," Cain replied to old Ghastly, as he used his AI system to scan the 2 dusk stones. Dusk Stone, Beginner, a mysterious stone that allows certain Pokémon to evolve. Dusk Stone, Intermediate, a mysterious stone that allows certain Pokémon to evolve and slightly improves their talent. If Murkrow were to use the intermediate Dusk Stone, his talent would probably increase by a small order and become dark green, Cain mused quietly. But what if it was an advanced Dusk Stone? Though the likelihood of such a discovery was scarce, the possibility remained. Cain accepted the 2 dusk stones, tucking them safely into his storage belt. "Thank you," he said to old Ghastly. "This is a fair exchange. You help us, and we help you. These stones serve no purpose to us, and if not for the energy they contain, we would never have bothered to collect them," the ghostly figure explained. Cain nodded in agreement. The dusk stone was only useful to those Pokémon who required it for evolution. After saying that, old Ghastly released a murky gas that enveloped Slowpoke. Murkrow let out a frightened caw, ready to defend his companion, but Cain reached out to calm him. The 2 kept a wary eye on old Ghastly, as the ghostly figure carried out his actions. Cain suspected that old Ghastly was up to something involving telepathy, for Slowpoke seemed to be cooperating with ease. As quickly as it appeared, the gas dissipated and returned to old Ghastly. Then Cain heard the ancient ghost's voice echoing in his mind. "There, I taught him telepathy." "He's a natural, that one," old Ghastly continued. "I can sense the latent psychic power within him, but he simply lacks the guidance to fully harness it. That, young human, is where you come in." Cain nodded, well aware of Slowpoke's untapped potential. Suddenly, a soft, childlike voice sounded in his mind. "Moss. Master." He looked down at the pink Pokémon in surprise, and was met with the sight of a faint blue light emanating from his eyes. "Is that you, Slowpoke?" Cain asked. Slowpoke gave a nod, but refrained from speaking telepathically again, seeming a bit shy. "Take your time," Cain reassured, patting the Pokémon's smooth head. "You'll get the hang of it." Murkrow, too, had heard Slowpoke's voice and was fluttering around in excitement. Although Pokémon didn't need to communicate telepathically, the addition of this new skill was thrilling. Meanwhile, Slowpoke looked on, still a bit embarrassed but undeniably pleased. Telepathy was an incredible skill, allowing for thoughts to be transferred without the need for traditional forms of communication. It was a kind of extrasensory perception that was truly remarkable. As Cain, Murkrow, and Slowpoke trailed behind old Ghastly through the winding labyrinthine cave, they noticed the Ghastlies they encountered no longer scowled at them. but instead regarded them with fondness. As they reached the entrance to another cavern, Old Ghastly came to a halt and cast his gaze upon the numerous Ghastlies congregated inside. Cain gave it a quizzical look. Was Old Ghastly not supposed to lead them out of the cave as it promised? Though he had no reason to suspect the Ghastlies would turn hostile, Cain couldn't help but feel uneasy being surrounded by them. As I previously stated, there shall be a reward for you if you fulfill a task for us, Old Ghastly announced before Cain could even pose the question. With that, he floated forward, gesturing for Cain to follow suit. As Cain stepped into the cavern, the Ghastlies fixated on him with fascination, gradually encircling him. Cain frowned, the unease within him growing stronger as he wondered what Old Ghastly had in store. These are all of our clansmen who are willing to accompany you. Choose one of them to be your Pokémon. Old Ghastly finally revealed the nature of the reward. In truth, granting Cain a Ghastly would prove beneficial for both parties. In its youth, Old Ghastly had ventured to the human world and formed a bond with a man. However, the conditions of that time were treacherous, plagued by disasters, and the man eventually perished in an accident. Old Ghastly then returned to his birthplace. During that time, humans and Pokémon had united to overcome the adversities of their environment. In the world of Pokémon, it was known that those who received aid from humans grew at a pace far quicker than those who roamed wild and free. Old Ghastly was fully aware that though life here in these caves would be carefree, with that ease came a lack of true strength and the struggle to reach the next stage of evolution into a haunter, let alone a Jengar. The prospect of a Ghastly following a human was an idea that had always lingered in Old Ghastly's mind, particularly after it encountered the powerful human that disrupted the area they inhabited. Then, a young trainer by the name of Cain arrived, and Old Ghastly was struck by the boy's potential. It made the decision to grant Cain the privilege of choosing one of the Ghastlies as his companion. The Ghastlies present were all relatively youthful and filled with excitement at the prospect of venturing into the human world. Having grown up listening to Old Ghastly's tales, they were eager to see for themselves the world beyond their own. The sight of Cain only heightened their enthusiasm. Cain was shocked and never expected Old Ghastly to reward him so generously. He held a special fondness for Ghastly, whether from playing Pokémon games on Earth or from his time as a member of Team Rocket in his past life. This was because, as a ghost and poison type, Ghastly had a versatility in battle that was unmatched. Upon evolving into its final form Jengar, it possessed extremely high special attack and speed stats, and could even mega-evolve into a powerhouse of destruction. Furthermore, Cain currently relied on Slowpoke's teleport for safety, but outside of Purgatory Island, there could be situations or places where having a Pokémon by his side was banned. In case of an attack, he might not even have enough time to call forth his Pokémon. But with a Ghastly by his side, Cain would never have to worry. This Pokémon could hide within his shadow, providing protection and security at all times. So when Old Ghastly said those words, they hit Cain straight in the feels. When Cain first arrived at the cave, the sight of the Ghastly bewitched him. He was tempted to catch one with an exceptional talent. Yet, as the Ghastlies multiplied, he quashed such thoughts. To pluck one from the midst of so many and retreat unscathed seemed impossible. And if caught, taming that Ghastly would prove a Herculean task, if not an insurmountable one. So the reward of Old Ghastly was exactly what Cain yearned for. Thus, he made a swift decision that if any of the Ghastlies possessed the talent he sought, he would take it. And if not, he deemed it unwise to squander resources on a Pokémon of average talent. For Cain believed in quality over quantity, and each Pokémon he trained had to be a virtuoso in its own right. With embarrassment concealed, Cain gave a nod to Old Ghastly. He couldn't help but feel that he was exploiting the Ghastlies. For others, choosing one with high talent from countless Ghastlies was a daunting task, but for Cain, who had his system, it was merely a question of scanning a few more times. So, as the young Ghastlies gazed at him with fawning adoration, Cain cast his eyes over them, and a table with the relevant data materialized before him. Most of the Ghastlies had a red aptitude, a few orange, and 2 had light yellow aptitudes. As Cain frowned, Old Ghastly inquired, "What's wrong? Can't find a suitable one?" He was astounded that Cain had not found a single Ghastly to his liking. Although not all the Ghastlies were present, those that were constituted almost half the clan. Chapter 54. Cain inclined his head, but remained silent. He felt no urgency to make a decision, as if he couldn't find a Ghastly that suited his needs here, he could always seek one elsewhere. There was no cause for discouragement. Old Ghastly, noticing Cain's imminent departure with Murkrow and Slowpoke, hesitated briefly before taking action. He beckoned to a nearby Ghastly and murmured something to it. Then he faced Cain and declared, "Please hold on. A few more are yet to arrive." Cain shot a look at Old Ghastly and, with a nod, settled into a patient wait. Minutes passed and the Ghastly that had previously left the cavern returned, accompanied by several more. Cain's eyes lit up at the sight of the new Ghastlies. It was evident they were distinct from those he had seen before. Their eyes shone brighter, the purple gas that surrounded them was more substantial, and they exuded excitement, as indicated by their broad grins. A glimmer appeared in Cain's eyes as he accessed the system and read their aptitudes. Yellow, yellow, light yellow, dark yellow, yellow, light green, dark green. He mentally recited each Ghastly's aptitude, growing increasingly amazed until he came across the last one, which had reached dark green. Pokémon. Ghastly. Dark green. Gender. Male. Level. 10. Type. Ghost plus poison. Ability. Levitate. Held items. None. Egg moves. Fire punch. Scary face. Haze. Basic moves. Hypnosis. Lick. Spite. Mean look. Taunt moves. Rest. Shadow ball. Psychic. Skill swap. Snore. Technical machines. TMs none. Old Ghastly watched as Cain zeroed in on a particular Ghastly and sighed wistfully. It seems you have a way of gauging their talent. This Ghastly is the most gifted member of our clan, and we had hoped for him to mature here and eventually lead the clan after I pass away. Cain wasn't surprised that old Ghastly discovered that he possessed a method of evaluating a Pokemon's talent, but he was taken aback by the fact that, despite its low level, this Ghastly had learned so many moves. It was a testament to both its innate talent and the support of its clan in its training. The Ghastly, too, noticed Cain's gaze and met it with curiosity. It was the first time it had seen a human and longed to explore the world beyond the cave, as described in old Ghastly's tales. These Ghastlies had been thrilled at the prospect of meeting a human, but old Ghastly had kept them at bay. Now, for some unknown reason, he had summoned them to meet the human they had been eager to see. I've made my choice, Cain stated firmly and approached the Ghastly with a dark green aptitude. Old Ghastly briefly considered intervening, but ultimately chose not to. From the moment he asked the other Ghastly to bring these talented young ones here, he had decided to let Cain decide for himself. He had not expected Cain to be so discerning and pick the most gifted one so quickly. Very well, old Ghastly said slowly, as if his heart was breaking. Cain approached the Ghastly with a smile and asked, "Would you like to join me and explore the vast, vibrant world outside?" Ghastly was momentarily stunned by Cain's offer, then glanced at old Ghastly and seeing no objection, nodded eagerly, "Yeah." Cain's smile widened as he retrieved a great ball from his belt and said, "If that's what you want, come on in." Murkrow and Slowpoke gazed upon Ghastly with joyous anticipation, aware that they would soon have another ally. Ghastly approached the great ball held in Cain's hand, delicately pressing the center button, and was enveloped by a red flash of light. With a sharp click, Ghastly was caught effortlessly. Cain beamed with satisfaction. It was a welcome surprise to have caught a talented and well-trained Ghastly, and he was relieved that he no longer needed to be constantly on guard. Releasing Ghastly from the Pokeball, Cain greeted him with a warm welcome. "Welcome aboard, Ghastly." Murkrow and Slowpoke voiced their approval with a chorus of "Caw" and "Yadong." Ghastly seemed even more lively and energetic, as he began to circle Cain, Murkrow, and Slowpoke, who were all elated to see their new companion. Cain smiled at Ghastly, who, despite being older than both Murkrow and Slowpoke, still retained a youthful spirit. He was certain that Ghastly would bring a new level of vitality to their team. Although old Ghastly struggled to keep his emotions in check, he was comforted by the sight of Ghastly's happiness. With everything settled, old Ghastly led Cain and the others to the entrance of the cave. Cain relished the feeling of being outside and basking in the warmth of the sun. The damp and chilly environment within the Ghastly-filled cave was not the most comfortable place to be. However, when he turned around, he noticed that old Ghastly remained at the entrance, avoiding the sunlight. Ghastly also showed a dislike for the sun, though without any noticeable physical discomfort. "Ghastly, just hide in my shadow for now," Cain said with a smile. Ghastly obliged, disappearing into Cain's shadow. Being in the shadow was much like being in a cave, but with the disadvantage of it being smaller. Cain decided not to put Ghastly back into his Pokeball, as one of Ghastly's future duties would be to protect Cain from the shadows, specifically his own shadow. So, it was best to let Ghastly acclimate as soon as possible. With a wave goodbye to old Ghastly, Cain set off. But he knew he would be back soon, drawn by the mysterious stone altar and the promise of a family visit with Ghastly. Old Ghastly hovered at the entrance of the cave, watching as Cain and the others departed. Eventually, with a sigh, he returned to the cave, his posture somewhat forlorn. A short distance away, Cain, Murkrow, and Ghastly stood under a tree, observing Slowpoke. Cain stroked the Pokemon's back and said, Slowpoke, use teleport to bring us back. Take it slow, focus on preserving your energy. Cain couldn't walk back because the trip from the cave to Team Rocket's base would take at least 3 days. He had accounted for Slowpoke's teleport, or else he wouldn't have been able to leisurely train Murkrow and Slowpoke along the way. Slowpoke, still new to telepathy, remained quiet and nodded. He enveloped Cain, Murkrow, and the hidden Ghastly with psychic energy. This caused Ghastly's body to rise above Cain's shadow, to his surprise. Ignoring Ghastly's reaction, Slowpoke focused on the coordinates. Teleporting 3 people over such a long distance was a heavy burden for him. Slowly, he gathered his energy, and with a bright flash, they vanished. Boom! When they reappeared, Cain was momentarily dizzy from the sudden spatial shift, but Murkrow and Ghastly were unaffected. Slowpoke, however, lost control of his body and nearly fell to the ground, disoriented. But he was prepared for it, thanks to Cain's warning. Slowpoke, your exertion has exceeded your limits, Cain spoke with a stern expression. Despite being uncertain of their location, he deduced from Slowpoke's depleted state that they were far from the Ghastly cave. Slowpoke obediently used the remnants of his psychic energy to hand the egg incubator, which he had protected, to Cain before collapsing onto the ground and using Calm Mind. Murkrow, Ghastly, keep vigilant of our surroundings and attack any approaching Pokémon without hesitation, Cain ordered with a serious tone. Caw. Yeah. Both Murkrow and Ghastly nodded, understanding the importance of their companion's safety. Ghastly, you are to traverse the shadows and survey the area for any formidable Pokémon. Ensure that you remain discreet at all times, Cain instructed Ghastly. Cain was still unaware of their location and needed Ghastly to gather information. Yeah, Ghastly nodded, recognizing the priority of the task. Though he was eager to explore the outside world for the first time, he remained disciplined, especially with Slowpoke in a weakened state. Ghastly gradually dissipated into the shadow cast by a nearby tree. He possessed the ability to move freely through any connected shadows, and the forest was teeming with them. Meanwhile, Murkrow continued to glide in the air, his sharp eyes never ceasing in their surveillance. As Cain sat beside Slowpoke, he gazed contemplatively at the incubator in his hand, which housed the larvitar egg. When scanned with the system, various parameters were displayed, but the hatching time remained unknown. The egg incubator displayed that the larvitar egg was unresponsive. How am I to hatch you? This is a vexing predicament, Cain muttered to the unresponsive larvitar egg with a hint of frustration. The sun dipped below the horizon as Ghastly returned, bringing news of the surrounding Pokémon. Through gestures formed by gas on his body, Ghastly informed Cain of the powerful creatures he had spotted and their location, finally allowing Cain to determine where they had been transported. It's no wonder Slowpoke is worn out, Cain thought. We're on the outskirts of the Scyther territory. It was well known that other Pokémon avoided the battle-crazed Scythers, who would never tire of challenging their foes, win or lose. Any wild Pokémon would be afraid of their never-ending cycle of conflict. The base wasn't far away, and Cain could reach it in a day if he hastened his pace. A second teleport from Slowpoke, once he had recovered, would significantly reduce the journey time. Slowpoke's mastery of teleport was improving with each use. This time, he had teleported more than 100 kilometers, a 10-fold increase from his previous range. Although each teleport drained Slowpoke's psychic energy, the benefits were immense. He still had some residual energy after this teleportation, enough to handle any unexpected events. Slowpoke fully regained his energy and opened his eyes, shining with vitality. How are you feeling, Slowpoke? Cain asked. Chapter 55. I'm good now, Slowpoke said telepathically to Cain, his eyes flashing blue. Cain's lips twitched into a smile at the sound of Slowpoke's childlike voice. The Pokémon's telepathy, which had previously been sluggish, now appeared much smoother. Cain gently stroked Slowpoke's pink head, saying, "Next time, don't act so boldly and listen to me." Slowpoke hummed contentedly in reply, then added, "Master, I've fully recovered and can use teleport again, no more mistakes." This news surprised Cain. If they could teleport to the same distance as before, they'd be close to the base. However, teleport could only take them to places they'd already been, so the closest they could get was around the waterfall area. Nevertheless, Cain believed that Slowpoke could teleport these distances easily and nodded, "Great, let's teleport and then get dinner ready." Cain called out to Murkrow, who was on sentry duty, and Ghastly, who was hiding in his shadow. "Murkrow, come down. Ghastly, come out." Ghastly slowly emerged and circled around Slowpoke, fascinated by his psychic moves. Slowpoke linked telepathically with Ghastly and took on the role of an elder brother. Cain smiled. "Okay, Ghastly, stop bothering Slowpoke." "Yeah, echoed Ghastly's voice as he obediently moved to Cain's side, as if proclaiming, "Look, I'm a good boy." As the group assembled, Slowpoke set to work casting Teleport. His proficiency in using the move was evident, as the psychic energy flowed with effortless precision, resulting in a much quicker casting time. Cain's eyes opened to find himself transported to another part of the forest. This place, he remembered with crystal clarity, was the site where he and Murkrow had been pursued by the Raticate colony, and where fate had brought him together with Slowpoke. Murkrow, who had not forgotten the harrowing experience, pointed out the scarred earth where they had made their escape. "I see," Cain chuckled, rubbing Murkrow's wings. "This is where we eluded our pursuers." Ghastly, intrigued by the exchange, asked Murkrow what they were talking about. As the eldest member and de facto leader of the team, Murkrow regaled Ghastly with the tale of their escape and the Raticates he had slain. Ghastly's arrival had infused new life into the group dynamic. Murkrow, Cain's first Pokémon, had always been a stalwart and dependable companion, speaking infrequently despite the burden of responsibility that came with being the first. Slowpoke, the second member to join, was timid, but had a steady and reliable personality. When it was just the two of them, they communicated in brief bursts of conversation before lapsing into silence. Ghastly, however, was a mischievous and eerie creature, and his arrival had become a catalyst for interaction between Murkrow and Slowpoke, both of whom were not particularly talkative. Cain didn't wish to disrupt their conversation, but as the sun began to dip below the horizon, he knew it was crucial to start a fire, lest they be vulnerable in the darkening wilderness. "Okay, let's pause for a moment," Cain interjected. "Murkrow, go hunt some hares or pheasants. Ghastly, gather firewood." Slowpoke, set up the tent using confusion. The trio sprang into action, performing their assigned tasks without a murmur of protest. As night fell, Murkrow and Slowpoke lay listlessly after devouring a sumptuous meal, while only Ghastly remained energetic. Though he didn't eat, he had imbibed the residual energy from the creatures caught by Murkrow. Ghastly briefly wondered what made his companions gobble up their food so quickly, but after a failed attempt to taste it himself, he abandoned the idea. "All right, rest time's over," Cain said after a while. "Digest your food before bed." At his words, both Murkrow and Slowpoke rose to their feet, ready for the day's training. Ghastly, unsure of what was happening, followed suit and stood with them. "Murkrow, use Dark Pulse on that tree 50 times, then follow up with 100 wing attacks," Cain instructed, pointing to a large nearby tree. "Slowpoke, you continue to hone Confusion. Today's goal is to lift those 5 rocks 500 times." As Slowpoke's psychic energy had grown considerably, so had Cain's training demands. "Ghastly," Cain said after a moment's pause, "you'll start with running. Run 2,000 laps around those 2 trees at your fastest speed. Let's see how your stamina holds up." Ghastly was participating in training for the first time, and Cain struggled to determine the appropriate amount of training required. He guessed an amount that appeared reasonable to him. Upon receiving Cain's instructions, Ghastly hastened to train independently. For Murkrow's Dark Pulse, the objective was to concentrate dark energy at a single point to maximize destruction. As for wing attack, the aim was to accumulate flying energy on the wings and reinforce them, as both factors influenced the damage dealt by this move. Slowpoke possessed decent water talent, but it was overshadowed by his psychic talent. Provided Confusion was efficiently trained and utilized in tandem with water-type moves, Slowpoke could offer both control and damage output during combat. In contrast, Ghastly and his subsequent evolutionary forms possessed high special attack and speed stats and excelled in attrition warfare, relying on damage over time rather than swift battles. Surviving the adversary's frenzied attacks was the primary criterion, as Ghastly's low health made him vulnerable to swift defeat by Pokémon that could restrain him. Thus, in battle, self-preservation was the foremost priority, followed by damage output. The longer Ghastly survived, the more damage he could inflict. His speed and potential future control moves would aid in his survival. According to Cain, Ghastly only needed to master Hypnosis, Dream Eater, Rest, Sleep Talk, and a handful of Poison-type moves. When fully employed, these moves could give rise to a multitude of ingenious strategies. Cain reappeared at the entrance of Team Rocket's base a day later. He had taken his time and devoted it to enhancing his Pokémon's level and moves. With the help of Murkrow and Slowpoke, Ghastly had engaged in battles against high-level opponents and had swiftly leveled up from 10 to 14. The intense fighting alongside Murkrow and Slowpoke transformed the already energetic Ghastly into a fierce combatant. Murkrow and Slowpoke also achieved levels 20 and 22, respectively, largely due to Ghastly's tendency to challenge any Pokémon he encountered. When he was bullied, he sought the help of Murkrow and Slowpoke to seek revenge. "Slowpoke, it's not suitable for you here. Take a rest in your Pokeball," Cain said as he retrieved Slowpoke's great ball. Although Slowpoke was pink like other Slowpokes, anyone with a sharp eye could discern that he was a shiny Pokémon. Cain's primary concern was not the trialists but rather some of the veteran Team Rocket grunts on the island. They would take the risk of stealing Slowpoke if the benefits were substantial enough. Cain instructed Ghastly to conceal the egg incubator containing the Larvitar egg in his shadow, and for Murkrow to accompany him into the Team Rocket base. The passage was familiar, but Cain felt no sense of despondency this time. It was said that one's outlook on the world changes as their strength grows. The commotion in the base was palpable, with trialists and Team Rocket grunts bustling about as if they were busy with something. Cain noticed a few suspicious individuals keeping an eye on him and quipped, "Interesting, looks like things just got more complicated." News of Cain's arrival quickly spread among those in positions of power, and a group of individuals emerged from the dormitory area, each with a Pokémon in tow, making their way to the central square. They were visibly nervous, excited, and scared, as they hurried along as if they were afraid of falling behind. When the lead figure caught sight of Cain, he rushed over with the others in tow. "Cain, you've returned," the lead figure said, revealing himself to be Sky. Chapter 56. As Sky approached Cain, he was accompanied by two Pokémon, an Ekans and a Coughing, who bore expressions of trepidation. With reverence, Sky bowed and was followed by about 20 men who mimicked his gesture, capturing the attention of nearby spectators who stared in amazement. Cain's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the scene before him, noting that among the group were a few individuals he recognized as former solitaries, all of whom possessed reasonably strong Pokémon. A quick scan of their Pokémon revealed that, on average, their levels were around 17. Cain was impressed by Sky's ability to assemble such a force in such a short period of time, and even more so by the fact that he had tamed Soros's Coughing, which now appeared fully subdued and had even increased in level. "Rise!" Cain commanded with indifference. "There is no need for formalities here." Sky obediently went to stand behind Cain, whereas the 24 men who had been bowing behind Sky rose in unison but kept their heads bowed, avoiding direct eye contact with Cain. Some of the more nervous attendees quietly wiped the sweat from their brows, relieved that Cain appeared unperturbed by their presence. With a smile, Cain declared, "You've done an excellent job, Sky." "It was only made possible by your reputation and this Coughing," Sky replied. There was a moment of hesitation in his speech as he weighed whether to reveal that some of the methods he employed to gather so many followers were somewhat unethical. The group consisted of individuals gathered during Soros' reign, solitaries who joined of their own accord due to Cain's reputation and strength, and others who were coerced into joining under duress, having been bullied with tales of Cain's power and brutality. In addition to coercion, Sky also used inducement, as evidenced by the Coughing he had been awarded by Cain, which instantly elevated him to a level of strength among the top trialists. But despite his success, Sky was hesitant to speak further, uncertain of Cain's reaction to the less savory aspects of his methods. As Sky hesitated, Cain locked his gaze onto him, causing Sky to panic. "I said excellent job," Cain said with a hint of annoyance. "I only care about the results, not the process." With a nod, Sky replied, "Yes, yes," his body sagging as he accepted Cain's reprimand, eager to avoid further correction. Cain was pleased with the outcome, even if he was unaware of the method Sky employed to assemble such a formidable group of individuals. As he had previously stated, the process was of little concern to him as long as the result met his expectations. These individuals were mere pawns in his grand scheme, and their actions held little bearing on his current plans. However, it was important to make the appropriate gestures and show appreciation to those who served him well. "Sky, provide me with your identification card and I will transfer 1,000 points to you as a reward for a job well done," Cain declared. The announcement elicited gasps from the group, as most had never seen such a substantial amount of points. "And you, Fox, you have also performed admirably," Cain continued. "I will transfer 200 points to you as a token of my appreciation." Rewards and punishments were the key to effective governance, and the group was enraptured by the potential for further rewards. Fox, who had accumulated a little over 100 points, was pleasantly surprised to receive twice that amount. Jealousy and envy bubbled among those who felt they were stronger, but their resolve to impress Cain was strengthened. "If you continue to perform well, all of you will be rewarded," Cain promised, taking in their reactions. "Points, Pokémon, items, the choice is yours when the time comes." With eyes ablaze with excitement, the group eagerly awaited the opportunity to prove their loyalty and earn the promised rewards. No one dared to question Cain's generosity when he dispensed 1,000 points and a Coughing as if they were insignificant, thus solidifying his faction on the trial island. This was in keeping with the hierarchical structure of Team Rocket, with multiple factions competing and growing under the leadership of Giovanni. The internal competition and the growth it fostered were critical to transforming Team Rocket from a small-time gang into a formidable force capable of challenging the Pokémon Association. Of course, Giovanni's strength, confidence, and charisma also played a crucial role. Cain issued a command, "Let's head back and await the start of the test." "Yes, Cain," replied Sky respectfully. "By the way, our brothers in the dormitory have built a hall for us as our gathering place." Cain's eyes lit up in approval of Sky's efficiency. The group made their way to the dormitory area, with Cain leading the way. "Why is the square so crowded?" Cain asked curiously. Before Sky could answer, they were interrupted by Xander, who approached with a large group in tow. He was dressed in a white Team Rocket uniform, with short brown hair and a piercing gaze. "The rules of the test have changed. The attack test is no longer the sole determining factor. Those who believe they are stronger than their rank may challenge someone up to 10 ranks higher. If they win, they switch places, and if they lose, they are demoted 10 places. And there's no restriction on killing your opponent," Xander stated. As he spoke, a malevolent gleam flared in Xander's eyes, revealing his intention to kill Cain. The latter, however, was unfazed, his laughter echoing softly in response to Xander's killing intent. "So, do you wish to engage me in battle prematurely?" Cain inquired with a hint of mirth. Sky, who was present, tensed, expecting the two to break into a physical altercation. But Cain, who was more familiar with Xander's character, was aware that the latter was not so foolish as to start a fight that would inevitably result in a widespread brawl, the outcome of which was difficult to predict. Xander sneered in disdain. "Do not assume that you have already achieved the top rank. You might be the one who will challenge me." Cain simply smiled, his composure unshaken. "We shall see." This nonchalant attitude only served to further infuriate Xander. Every time he approached Cain with fervor, he was met with a demeanor that was far too relaxed for his liking. "Please stand aside," Cain requested politely, noting that Xander, red-faced and seething, was blocking his path. Xander's hands were balled into fists, and he appeared as if he might lash out at any moment. His Ekans, a serpentine Pokémon, was coiled beside him, its eyes fixed on Cain with cold determination. Meanwhile, Cain's Murkrow was ready to defend at a moment's notice. However, Xander, struggling to regain his composure, eventually retreated with a grunt of frustration, taking his Ekans and his followers with him. As he watched Xander depart with a glum expression and his followers keeping their heads down, Cain couldn't help but laugh. Despite Xander's arrogance and pride, Cain held no ill will towards him as a person. However, if Xander insisted on making him an enemy, Cain would not hesitate to retaliate. For the 24 new recruits who accompanied Cain and Sky, the walk from the square to the dormitory felt like an endless journey, made even more tense by the possibility of a potential conflict with Xander. However, it proved to be a false alarm, and when Cain arrived at the hall as directed by Sky, he was taken aback by the size of the building, despite its simple, wooden exterior. Xander, on the other hand, was left to ponder his next move. He was determined to prove himself and not rely on his older brother's influence to succeed in the trial. Meanwhile, the recruits who followed him still held on to the hope that Xander would lead them out of the trial island and secure them a better position in Team Rocket through his brother's authority. Little did they know, Xander's ambition far exceeded their expectations. Chapter 57. As he strode into the hall, Cain was met with a grand and spacious room, featuring a towering platform at its center, upon which a regal chair was perched. Undeterred, Cain made a beeline for the chair and took his seat with ease, while his companion, Murkrow, alighted upon the backrest. Gazing down at the 2 rows of onlookers, Cain was momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliarity of his surroundings. He couldn't help but reflect on the ambition that drove so many to seek power, to rule from on high, looking down upon their subjects. Stepping forward, Sky broke the silence. "Cain, our group now numbers 25, with an average rank of around 40, he said. "Our strongest members hold ranks in the 10s and 20s, making us a formidable presence in this base." Cain nodded silently, gesturing for him to continue. "So far, our standing has kept any potential enemies at bay," Sky continued. "In just 2 brief days, we've amassed a total of 237 points, all of which are recorded on my identity card." On this trial island, there was an implicit understanding that joining a group offered a degree of protection, but also required a contribution of 20% of any completed missions. "For now, those points will remain in your care," Cain said, his tone dismissive. "Anyone who has contributed can be rewarded directly." He saw little value in such a small number of points, recognizing that even the strongest of trialist groups would pale in comparison to the vast power of Team Rocket. However, he had formed this force for the sole purpose of recruiting his own loyal members, once he had established himself within Team Rocket. After Cain listened to Sky's report, he dismissed the group of men. He was not one to linger in the company of others, not in his former life nor in his current. He found solace only in the presence of his Pokémon. Sky's managerial skills, however, caught Cain off guard, and he delegated all management responsibilities to him, opting for a hands-off approach. Should Sky remain loyal, he would be Cain's first true underling in Team Rocket. "I trust you will not disappoint me, Sky," Cain whispered as he and Murkrow departed from the hall. The afternoon had been designated for the test, thanks to Viper's alterations to the rules. Cain had some time to spare before the test began and decided to head to the Exchange Center to submit Umbra's mission. The Exchange Center was bustling with activity as the trialists had adapted and figured out how to earn points by completing tasks and exchange them for various items. However, unlike Cain, many struggled to earn a few dozen points, with more difficult or coveted missions snatched up by larger groups. Despite the bustling environment, a familiar staff member at one of the counters noticed Cain's arrival and beckoned him over with a smile. "I never expected you to return without issue. Sir had instructed that you could proceed straight to him once you arrived," the staff member greeted Cain. Cain was befuddled by Umbra's arrangement but merely nodded. In an inconspicuous corner, the staff member once more unlocked the hidden door for Cain. This time, as he traversed the gloomy passageway, his spirit was much lighter. His previous dealings with Umbra had led him to believe that as long as he had value, Umbra would not turn against him. Moreover, the award of the Shadow Unit's Reserve Member Medal further solidified this belief. The room was unchanged, with its familiar bookshelves and desk, but Umbra was no longer concealed beneath his enigmatic hooded cloak. This was the first occasion Cain had beheld Umbra's true visage. He was a man with light brown hair, pallid skin from years of absence from sunlight, and a countenance that blended European and Asian features. One hand clasped a book, 3 fingers missing, while the other, delicate and almost feminine, held it steady. His attire, a simple black suit, exuded elegance and competence. As Umbra became aware of Cain's arrival, he abandoned his reticence from their previous encounter, and greeted him with a smile. "You're here," he said. The surprise that Cain had managed to return was absent from his voice. Cain acknowledged the greeting and approached the desk, where he courteously placed Jengar's Pokeball, which he had brought along, onto the surface. Umbra's gaze became complex as he laid his eyes upon the Pokeball. He retrieved it from the desk and, through the semi-transparent top, he could make out the form of Jengar within. Jengar, who had been idly reclining inside the ball, also caught sight of Umbra and sprang to his feet, his expression one of eagerness. "I have wronged you, Jengar," Umbra addressed the ghostly Pokémon within the ball, before securing it in its designated compartment on his belt. He then turned to Cain, who stood respectfully, and said, "You have performed admirably. You may return to the staff member and receive your well-deserved reward of 10,000 points." The sum, though substantial, was a mere trifle to one in Umbra's position. "Yes," Cain replied curtly, his self-discipline unchanged. Umbra had always been impressed with Cain's ability to hold his tongue and know the appropriate times to speak and remain silent. Umbra then inquired, with a smile, "Are you not curious as to why I had placed Jengar there?" Cain was taken aback by Umbra's sudden question. In his mind, Umbra was a no-nonsense individual who did not waste time on idle conversation. Yet, here he was, making small talk. With a composed expression, Cain replied, "I am indeed curious, but if Mr. Umbra does not wish to share, I shall not pry." Cain held immense respect for Umbra, not only for his esteemed position as the deputy leader of the Shadow Unit, but also for his strength as a senior elite-level trainer. Umbra paused momentarily before bursting into laughter. "Huh! You're really good." The smile slowly faded from Umbra's face as he spoke. "Jengar was badly injured in a battle to protect me. I knew of a place on this trial island where he could recover quickly, the gathering place of Ghastlies that you visited. I discovered it when I first arrived on the island as one of the first batch of Team Rocket trialists." Cain was astonished. Umbra was one of the first trialists on Purgatory Island? As if reading Cain's thoughts, Umbra continued, "Yes, it's precisely what you're thinking. At the time, this island was newly discovered, and only 2 trialists survived. I was one of them. You may meet the other one later." Though Umbra did not name the other survivor, Cain surmised it was Tenebris, the other deputy leader of the Shadow Unit. Bringing the conversation back to its original topic, Umbra asked, "Anyway, I assume you have seen the stone altar releasing the constant stream of ghost energy, correct?" "That place is beyond your current capabilities," Umbra warned Cain. "Luckily, you refrained from delving too deeply. It's imperative that you keep this location a secret. You will naturally know the truth when the time is right." Cain's eyes narrowed briefly before returning to their impassive state. He replied simply, "Understood." Umbra nodded. Though Cain's response was terse, he detected a glimmer of intrigue in his eyes. As you have completed the first phase of my evaluation, you are now eligible to know my true identity within Team Rocket, Umbra announced without further elaboration. The mention of Umbra's identity sent Cain's heart racing. He had known Umbra's identity for some time, but had been unable to show it. After all, in Team Rocket, only the strongest were aware of Umbra's existence. Retrieve the medal I gave you earlier, Umbra instructed. Cain retrieved a black, cloud-shaped medallion from his belt and handed it to Umbra. As Umbra took the medallion, he ran his finger over its grooves. This medallion signifies your status as a reserve member of Team Rocket's most enigmatic division, he explained. Its acceptance marks the continuation of my evaluation. The mission you completed earlier was just the beginning. Umbra paused for a moment before continuing. I am Umbra, the deputy leader of the Shadow Unit. If you successfully complete the series of tasks I set for you, you will be welcomed into our ranks. I cannot divulge the benefits of joining or the responsibilities you will undertake, but I can assure you that many in Team Rocket are vying to become a part of us, even those who are not strong enough to be aware of our existence. You have a choice before you, Umbra presented to Cain. You may either persist with the mission until you become eligible to join us, or relinquish it and embark on the trial on this island, commencing as a Team Rocket grunt or junior officer and gradually advancing through the ranks. The options offered by Umbra were not of equal weight. Cain had arrived at his decision well in advance of hearing Umbra's words. The prospect of joining the Shadow Unit and climbing the ladder of Team Rocket was not in conflict, and Umbra's aid made it all the easier. To prevent Umbra from catching on, however, Cain kept his head down and pretended to ponder. Umbra didn't suspect anything, as there were numerous facets of the Shadow Unit that could not yet be disclosed. In Umbra's eyes, Cain's decision was solely a matter of intuition. I have chosen to continue the mission, Cain declared after a moment of silence. He saw no reason to question a decision he had made long ago. Umbra smiled upon hearing Cain's response. You will find that your choice was wise in due time, he said. Cain merely nodded, giving no indication that he had taken note of Umbra's remark. Some things are better left unsaid, but he knew he had made the right choice. In that moment, a buzzing sound filled the room, growing louder and more distinct. Cain was taken aback by the familiar noise, and soon noticed a bead rill flying towards Umbra, its two needles rubbing against Umbra's arm in a show of affection. This is, Cain said, his expression shifting from surprise to realization upon seeing the bead rill. Correct, Umbra confirmed with a smile. This little one was born from the Pokémon egg you gave me last time. This only added to Cain's confusion. While bug-type Pokémon do have a relatively fast growth cycle, a week to hatch and evolve into a beedrill seemed far too short. Noting Cain's bewilderment, Umbra explained, this child has good talent and has been training rigorously each day. It just evolved into a beedrill today. Chapter 58. Pokémon, Beedrill, Dark Green. Gender, Male. Level, 11. Type, Bug plus Poison. Ability, Sniper. Held items, none. Egg moves, Bug Bite, Focus Energy. Basic moves, Twineedle, Fury Attack. Taunt moves, Laser Focus. Technical machines, TM's Protect, Toxic, Hidden Power, Fire. Cain was taken aback when he viewed the data of the beedrill. Not only was its growth rate impressive, but its aptitude had reached dark green, an upgrade from its original green aptitude. This was undoubtedly due to Umbra having access to an abundance of resources. Though small, this step forward would mean a significant boost in the beedrill's battling power in the future, especially with Umbra's dedicated training. Cain was also shocked to learn about the beedrill's ability. While the typical ability for a beedrill is Swarm, which increases the power of bug-type moves when its health is low, there's a rare hidden ability called Sniper that boosts the power of critical hits. Normally, a critical hit deals 1.5 times normal damage, but with the Sniper ability, the damage increases to 2.25 times the normal amount. The Sniper ability was a formidable asset, and Cain might have kept the beedrill for himself if he had known about it beforehand. But the probability of this hidden ability appearing was so low that Umbra was just lucky to have come across it. This was likely why he invested so many resources into it. After the initial shock, Cain composed himself. Despite the beedrill's impressive qualities, he stood firm in his decision. Umbra noticed the change in Cain's expression and was pleased to see that he was not having second thoughts. This trial is special, so there's no need to hold back, Umbra said sternly. I can't reveal all the details now, but I can tell you that it's safe to showcase your talents. Don't worry about being targeted. As a member of Team Rocket, Umbra was well aware of their reputation for killing geniuses. He could understand Cain's concerns, but this trial was different. Cain's eyes widened in surprise as he listened to Umbra's words. This trial was special? How come he didn't feel it in his previous life? Have you not noticed? Umbra continued. This batch of trialists possess a level of talent surpassing the norm, and more importantly, many of them have received high-aptitude Pokémon. Do you really think everyone has a brother like Xander? Cain's pupils suddenly contracted as the reality of the situation hit him. Why would a green aptitude Pokémon be given to someone who was essentially being used as cannon fodder? And if the trialist were to die, wouldn't that be too great a loss? How come he didn't realize this in his previous life? Was it because his ranking was too low to qualify? I've seen your Murkrow's talent, and your recent performance whilst using the weight-bearing device was impressive. Although conserving your strength is never a bad idea, I must say that if you have aspirations of rising the ranks in Team Rocket, this trial is a golden opportunity. Especially this time, it's something special, Umbra spoke, his words carrying an air of significance even though he did not explain what made this trial different. Cain frowned. If Umbra was saying so, then he couldn't help but fear that this trial was indeed exceptional. He was not naive enough to believe that success in this trial would guarantee a higher position in the organization. But he knew that if Umbra was right, then giving it his all might lead to future opportunities. However, it was a dangerous game, like walking a tightrope without a safety net. Cain could not fully trust Umbra, but the man's words did prompt a change in his plans. Just as Cain was about to reconsider his approach, Umbra dropped another bombshell. The little one in your shadow is also quite a talented Pokémon. You're lucky to have it, Umbra said, his gaze trained meaningfully on the shadow behind Cain. Cain broke out in a cold sweat as he slowly reached for the Pokeball on his Team Rocket belt, ready to release Slowpoke and teleport away at a moment's notice. It may not have been much, but he was not prepared to die without putting up a fight. Seeing Cain's guarded expression, Umbra chuckled and gestured with his hand. Relax. I'm not so cruel as to pick on someone like you. That Pokémon is yours and I have no intention of taking it from you. If I did, I wouldn't be wasting my time chatting with you now, would I? And even if you were to summon another Pokémon, would it do you any good? Umbra spoke with the pride and confidence of a senior elite-level trainer. He didn't believe that someone like Cain could escape his grasp. With a rueful smile, Cain lowered his hand from his belt. He realized that he had overreacted. Maybe Umbra was just testing him to see how he would react. One thing was for certain. Even if Cain released all 3 of his Pokémon, he wouldn't be able to escape. Umbra's Jengar alone was enough to handle him. As Cain gradually relaxed, Umbra signaled for his Beedrill to go and play on its own. Leaning forward and bracing his hands on the table, Umbra continued, Anyway, do well in this upcoming test. If you meet my expectations, I may let you leave Purgatory Island earlier than planned. Cain was taken aback by Umbra's words. If he were able to leave this trial island earlier, the benefits would be tremendous. After a brief internal struggle, he was finally unable to resist the temptation. Understood, Mr. Umbra, Cain responded. Umbra nodded, a hint of a smile playing at the edges of his lips as he leaned back in his seat. Chapter 59. As Cain stepped out of the dimly lit study, he realized that his back was drenched in sweat. He had been shocked when Umbra commented on Ghastly's talent, but was relieved to realize Umbra just thought his overreaction was due to him being afraid of having his Pokémon stolen, rather than him having an ability to distinguish a Pokémon's talent. Still, Cain resolved to be more cautious in the future and keep his emotions in check. Patting his warm cheeks, he took a deep breath and tried to calm his rattled nerves. To shake off the lingering thoughts, he decided to focus on something else. Murkrow's moveset met Cain's immediate needs, but Slowpoke and Ghastly had yet to learn any new moves from TMs. It was time for some upgrades. Firstly, Cain would have to exchange for 2 Protect moves, using all 10,000 of the points he had earned from the mission. It was a necessary expense, and one that didn't bother him in the slightest. As his closest guardian, this new move was crucial for Ghastly. Not only could it block enemy moves in battle, but it would also protect Cain in times of need. Similarly, for Slowpoke, this move was just as important, providing much-needed protection during battle or using it just before teleport to make an escape. Cain also ran simulated battles for Ghastly and Slowpoke in his mind. Ghastly's signature fighting style involved the combination of Hypnosis, Dream Eater, Rest, Sleep Talk, and Toxic. Thankfully, he had already learned Hypnosis and Rest, but he still needed to acquire Dream Eater, Sleep Talk, and Toxic to fully embody this fighting style. Unfortunately, Cain didn't have enough points to exchange for those valuable moves at the moment. If he had to choose, Cain was leaning towards Sleep Talk, as Dream Eater could be learned upon leveling up and Toxic wouldn't be of much use to Ghastly in the short term, who had not yet fully developed his poison attribute. In the future, Cain planned to train Ghastly's poison attribute and then pair it with proper poison-type moves. So first he would exchange for Sleep Talk, which would cost an additional 7,000 points. Cain was ready to invest the resources necessary for Ghastly to unleash his power. As for Slowpoke, a water and psychic-type Pokémon, there were many Pokémon he could restrain and vice versa. He was twice as susceptible to bug, ghost, grass, electric, and dark types, which was a significant disadvantage. But by obtaining a suitable attribute through hidden power, Slowpoke could potentially overcome his weakness. It all came down to luck, as the attribute obtained through hidden power was completely random. Despite being a relatively common move, the high demand for hidden power meant its exchange cost was not low, requiring another 7,000 points. Cain had 6,200 points left from his original 7,400 after rewarding Sky and Fox. Adding in the 10,000 points from his latest mission, Cain now had a total of 16,200 points. However, to acquire Protect, X2, Sleep Talk and Hidden Power, he would need 24,000 points. Therefore, Cain knew he needed to accumulate more points before he could make the exchanges he desired. Cain's thoughts raced at lightning speed as he approached the familiar exchange staff member and handed over his ID card, explaining the situation. The exchange staff, prepared for Cain's request, took the card and waited for him to continue. After a moment's hesitation, Cain made a decision. He took out a small palm-sized black stone from his Team Rocket belt, deciding to exchange it for more points. He knew exchanging valuable items like the intermediate dusk stone or the geocentric cleansing milk for points at their Team Rocket's purchase price would be a waste. Instead, he opted to exchange the beginner dusk stone, which was the most common kind of evolutionary stone. Team Rocket's exchange list listed the price of the stone at 50,000 points, but with a 30% tax, Cain would only receive 35,000 points. He was secretly unhappy with Team Rocket's profit-hungry exchange system, but handed over the stone anyway. The exchange staff, familiar with Cain's luck, was shocked at the amount of points Cain had accumulated. With 20,000 points from before, 10,000 points from completing Umbra's mission, and now this beginner dusk stone, Cain had amassed a total of 65,000 points. The exchange staff took the beginner dusk stone with a forced smile and thanked his lucky stars that Cain had not brought out an advanced dusk stone. If that were the case, all the resources on the trial island would have been emptied by Cain. I want 2 Protect TMs, 1 Sleep Talk TM, and 1 Hidden Power TM, Cain said, his words faltering slightly. He paused, then corrected himself. Make that 3 Hidden Power TMs. His thoughts raced as he wondered if the newly awakened attributes would make up for his Pokémon's weaknesses. Ultimately, it was a matter of luck. The exchange staff tried to hide his surprise as he witnessed Cain recklessly spending his points. The corners of his eyes twitched, unable to keep his emotions in check. Here's your identity card, the staff member said, whilst also handing Cain his TMs. You still have 13,200 points on it. Cain took the TMs and placed them in his storage belt, not bothering to examine them closely. He nodded at the staff member, who lowered his head and went back to his work. The staff member couldn't help but feel a twinge of jealousy as he watched Cain leave with so many points. He had been with Team Rocket for 2 years and was still just a civilian staff member. The discrepancy in points was a reminder of his own shortcomings. Cain didn't pay much attention to the staff member's odd behavior and headed to a special training room with Murkrow. He preferred to use the move learning devices there, instead of exposing his wealth at the exchange center. It was Cain's first time using a training room. In addition to the move learning device, there were various training tools and wooden stakes scattered throughout the room. Although it was well equipped, it was rarely used, and most of the rooms remained empty. Cain paid 100 points and chose the largest room, ignoring the strange gaze of a staff member. After locking the door, he called out Ghastly from his shadow and instructed him to check for any surveillance cameras. Ghastly quickly scoured the room and reported back that it was clear of any surveillance devices. With that, Cain released Slowpoke from his Pokeball. Slowpoke was not used to being cooped up for half a day and kept yawning. Cain stroked his round head apologetically, whilst Slowpoke adjusted to his new surroundings. Murkrow and Ghastly, noticing Slowpoke, flew over and began chatting with him. The 3 Pokémon played for a while, until Cain interrupted them. Training had been intense lately, so this moment of play was a rare break. Come here and learn these moves, Cain said, holding up the TMs. Cain called his Pokémon back into their Pokeballs and then methodically placed each one onto the move learning device. The TM would impart the knowledge of the chosen moves, but mastering them would take practice. Protect and Sleep Talk presented different challenges. Protect was a move that could be used instantly upon learning, but there was little that could be done in the way of improvement. Whereas, Sleep Talk would only be mastered through actual combat experiences. What intrigued Cain most, however, was the attribute that each Pokémon would acquire after learning hidden power. He decided to check Murkrow's new attribute first. As the de facto leader of Cain's team, Murkrow would serve as a guide. Murkrow closed his eyes and summoned a hidden force from within. It took him 3 full minutes of concentrated effort to successfully unleash the energy. Electric currents danced around Murkrow, gathering and forming into a yellow energy ball that flickered with occasional yellow lightning. As Murkrow gathered more and more electric energy, the yellow ball of energy grew denser and brighter. The yellow electric current started turning a light blue, but the energy ball became too much for Murkrow to handle, so he released it towards the target in the center of the room. The yellow energy ball struck the target with a loud explosion, creating a blast radius that sent yellow and blue currents of electricity flying out. Despite the ferocity of the attack, the room was barely affected, with only a black mark left on the ground as evidence of the explosion. The soundproofing was so effective that the loud explosion went unnoticed by the staff. Cain couldn't help but think that this training room was a wise investment. The hidden power move was a single target attack with area of effect capabilities, as the energy ball gathered using the newly awakened attribute could cause damage to multiple enemies within the blast radius. As for Murkrow's hidden power, from the color and appearance, it was obviously of the electric attribute. And although it looked similar to the Electro Ball move, it wasn't quite as powerful, but it did seem helpful for Murkrow against Water-type Pokémon. Additionally, when fighting against Flying-type Pokémon, this attribute gave Murkrow an aerial advantage for dominating the skies. Satisfied, Cain rewarded Murkrow by gently petting his feathers. Chapter 60. After testing Murkrow's awakened attribute, it was Slowpoke's turn. The second brother of the team also took 3 minutes to use hidden power. Unlike Murkrow's lightning-filled yellow energy ball, Slowpoke's energy ball was red, with scorching heat radiating from it. The fire-type hidden power was perfect for Slowpoke. Not only did it increase his versatility, but it also compensated for his weakness. In fact, it was the most suitable attribute for him. He would no longer be helpless against bug and grass-type Pokémon, as he now had a way to effectively attack them and wouldn't constantly be on the receiving end. However, Cain knew that he couldn't let Slowpoke face electric and dark-type Pokémon unless it was absolutely necessary. Those two types of Pokémon were far too effective against Slowpoke. To Cain's surprise, Ghastly's awakened attribute was of the grass type. Although the attributes of hidden power had nothing to do with the Pokémon themselves, the grass attribute was still a surprising revelation. Of the 18 attributes, grass type had the most counters, but likewise, restrained certain attributes. Combined with hypnosis and other control moves, the awakened grass attribute hidden power could give Ghastly that much-needed edge in battle. Cain was pleased with the results of the newly awakened attributes of all 3 Pokémon, especially Slowpoke, who had made up for his shortcomings considerably. Cain quickly set a training plan for his Pokémon. Murkrow and Slowpoke would train hidden power, while Ghastly would receive special training from Cain. Since Ghastly had just joined the team, he had only undergone a few low-level fights and physical strength and endurance training. Cain planned to give him more intense training so he could fully utilize hidden power. However, the first move Ghastly needed to master wasn't hidden power, but Sleep Talk, which he also acquired from a TM. Sleep Talk allowed Ghastly to perform one of his moves while sleeping, but it was random. Cain had encountered a powerful Jengar in his previous life that could use specific moves while sleeping. Although Cain wasn't sure how the other Jengar had been trained, the fact that it was possible meant that Sleep Talk could be controlled. So, the first thing Ghastly needed to do now was figure out which moves to perform when using Sleep Talk. As Ghastly was just starting out, the requirements were minimal. There was no need to limit Ghastly to a specific move. Cain simply needed Ghastly to be able to use a move from a designated move set. Any move would suffice. The training room was soon filled with scenes of Murkrow and Slowpoke using hidden power to attack targets while avoiding the unpredictable moves Ghastly released in his sleep. At first, Ghastly's moves were messy and uncontrolled, but with Cain gradually adjusting his state and situation, Ghastly was able to control the choice of moves to within 5. This was a huge improvement and confirmed Cain's theory that even Sleep Talk could be controlled with the right approach. Cain was determined to unlock the full potential of Ghastly's Sleep Talk move. Despite the difficulties, he was determined to find a way to control it. At first, Cain thought to try and control Sleep Talk by inducing a dream when using rest. However, he soon realized that it was impossible to create a powerful dream in such a short time. Next, Cain attempted to control Sleep Talk by giving orders while Ghastly was using the move. Unfortunately, this attempt also failed. Finally, Cain came up with a new conjecture. What if Ghastly focused on recalling the move he wanted to perform before using rest? To test this conjecture, Ghastly concentrated on recalling hidden power before using rest and Sleep Talk. And to Cain's delight, the number of times hidden powers was used significantly increased. Excited by this discovery, Cain even entertained the idea of using telepathy to strengthen Ghastly's concentration of consciousness when using sleep talk. It was a new direction worth exploring. Cain was confident that with continued effort, he would find a way to fully realize the potential of Ghastly's sleep talk, increasing his combat power by several levels. As Cain stepped into the bustling plaza at the center of the base, he was trailed only by the ominous Murkrow. Slowpoke returned to his Pokeball and Ghastly disappeared into Cain's shadow, blending in with the darkness. With the third test looming, the plaza began to fill with competitors, eager to begin. In the center of the plaza stood a towering trial stone on a high platform, and beside it, a flat battleground had been prepared. The ground had been cleared of weeds and flattened, ready for the battles to come. The lines drawn on the ground marked the boundaries of the battlefield, where the trialists would soon face off against each other. More and more participants arrived, each congregating in their own small groups. Cain took up position in the western corner of the plaza, and soon Sky and his entourage approached, joining Cain. Sky greeted Cain respectfully and then organized everyone to line up behind him. They had become one of the few formidable factions in the plaza. Cain barely acknowledged their presence, closing his eyes instead to meditate. The plaza was now divided into two clear factions. Cain's, with over 20 followers at the western corner, and Xander's, with the largest group of about 40 at the eastern side, all glaring at Cain and his crew. Jasmine, who ranked just below Cain and Xander in the previous test, entered the plaza with her own following of over 20 people, most of them young women, and took up position on the northern side. A few young men trailed behind her, but they appeared to be low in status, being scolded by the girls. On the southern side stood about 30 individuals, a disparate group of lone wolves who had banded together to avoid being picked on by the other factions. They stood apart from each other, not speaking a word. Viper arrived with his entourage, but Umbra was nowhere to be seen. Team Rocket then began the simplest and most straightforward test, the attack value test. To avoid a repeat of the previous test where no one was willing to go first, they followed the sequence of each participant's number, making the test progress quickly. This way, they could keep track of who was eliminated and the strength of the remaining competitors. Murkrow stood obediently at Cain's feet, unfazed by the greedy, jealous, and fearful glances directed his way. He simply tidied his feathers, bored by the proceedings. In Murkrow's opinion, this test was a waste of time. Attacking the hard and smelly rock only showed a Pokemon's attack power, not their overall combat capabilities. As Murkrow scanned the plaza, he found no worthy opponents besides the stinky snake across from it, the fat Zubat in the north who appeared to still be sleeping, and the long-haired dog in the south. If it weren't for the tension from the spectators, Murkrow would have told Cain that participating in such a dull test was a waste of time. He would rather train more. Cain, who knew Murkrow best, was aware of his thoughts. Patience. Murkrow. After this test, we won't have to do anything as boring. And who knows, maybe you'll get to fight a few more times today. Cain said, casting a glance at Xander and Ekans standing across from him. Xander caught Cain's gaze and a smirk appeared on his face, as if to say, just you wait. After a snort, he looked away. Murkrow perked up at Cain's words and followed his gaze to the snake he was eager to fight. He couldn't help but want to take flight. But just as he began to spread his wings, he remembered the current situation and reluctantly retracted them. Cain, familiar with Murkrow's combative nature, believed that today could be the day for Murkrow to finally satisfy his desire for conflict. This belief was not solely due to Xander, but also the presence of Zubat trainer Jasmine in the north and Alan, the strongest lone trialist in the south. Cain observed them periodically glancing in his direction with expressions reflecting a blend of eagerness, envy, and hunger for battle. Cain's mouth curled into a smile, his eyes sparkling with amusement. This test is quite intriguing. I wonder what deeper purpose lies behind Viper's modification of the rules, he thought to himself, feeling a thrill of excitement. He was convinced that Umbra had a hand in changing the rules of this test. He could even imagine Umbra lurking in the shadows, observing his every action. His intuition told him that there was someone watching him constantly, someone who held the key to his goal of leaving the trial island with a commanding victory. He couldn't afford to hold back. He had to show his superior strength, both in attack value and actual combat. This test was unlike the others before. Participants were encouraged to show their true talent, instead of hiding behind a mask of deception. In this life-and-death arena, it was pointless to keep one's true strength concealed, especially when facing opponents of equal caliber. Cain could sense that some of the participants, those with hidden backgrounds, suspected that this test was different. They saw him as their primary target. Murkrow, too, was eager for a battle, and Umbra was keen to test Cain's mettle. So, Cain embraced the challenge. He hoped to establish his dominance and make a lasting impression on the other participants, to show them his unrivaled, despotic power. "All right, folks, listen up," the examiner called out, as everyone lined up in front of the trial stone. "It's time for the third round of testing." The trial takers had already gone through 2 rounds, so they were familiar with seeing high attack values. And as the examiner read out each number and score, the improvement was evident. Although not as drastic as the second round, the pressure of life and death had pushed everyone to do their best. For those who had been at the bottom of the rankings, this was their chance to shine. They had trained tirelessly, desperate to avoid the fate of being in last place, a death sentence. Number 46, attack value 198, next, the examiner called out, followed by a series of scores. Some trial takers smiled with satisfaction, while others couldn't hide their worry. But there was still hope, the final challenge to fight for survival. These tests were like a sieve, filtering out the weak and revealing the strong. As long as you had the ability, you wouldn't be left behind. Then it was Xander's turn, with his Eakins. "Eakins, use bite," Xander commanded, and with a resounding pang, their score was revealed, a staggering 337 points. They were the first to break the 300-point barrier, and Xander strutted off the platform with a proud smirk, Eakins following close behind. Ever since Cain claimed first place in the last round, Xander had been working even harder to train his Pokémon. And now, his hard work had paid off. His gaze briefly met Cain's before he managed to control his expression. He may have been proud, but he wasn't foolish. Today's attack value test was just a warm-up for the real challenges. No matter how well he performed now, it wouldn't matter if he couldn't defeat his opponent in actual combat. Cain couldn't deny that Xander had trained Eakins to the best of his abilities with limited resources. If it weren't for his own rebirth, Xander might have once again overshadowed everyone and claimed first place. Xander's impressive showing had caused a buzz of excitement among the contestants. Those who came after him were fired up, eager to match his performance. Number 134, attack 308, came the announcement, as another contestant broke through the 300-point mark, just like Xander. The Pokémon accompanying her was a massive Zubat, and it belonged to Jasmine, the third-place finisher from the last test. Cain didn't remember much about Jasmine from his previous life. Even after joining Team Rocket, they had never interacted much. She was quite the enigma. For a young girl to maintain her third-place ranking under the intense pressure from Cain and Xander on the harsh trial island was no small feat, and yet, she had even managed to gather a group of people to challenge Xander. Cain couldn't help but think to himself, this person's identity is likely more complex than it seems. Number 156, attack 330. The strongest of the lone wolves, Alan, was the first trialist to successfully evolve his Pokémon, a Poochyena, into a larger, more powerful Mytyena. With this advantage, he rose above Jasmine and became second only to Xander in terms of attack value. Cain had noticed something odd about this trial ever since Umbra hinted that it was different from the others. For instance, Pokémon that would have been coveted by Team Rocket officers were instead given to this batch of trialists. Both Xander's Eakins and Jasmine's Zubat were Pokémon with good talent, and even Alan's Mytyena was impressive. Moreover, how did this Pokémon from the Hoenn region end up among those from the Kanto region? It was all just too strange, and Cain couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. In his previous life, survival was his only concern, so he didn't dwell on it. But now, experiencing it for the second time, he couldn't ignore the strange things happening around him. Number 234, prepare for the test. The examiner's voice interrupted Cain's thoughts, reminding him that it was finally his turn to take the test. As he walked onto the stage with Murkrow in tow, everyone's eyes were on him. The trial participants had felt the sting of Cain's power. After all, he had taken care of Soros with ease, subdued Sky, and even gifted him a coughing, solidifying his reputation as a ruthless and powerful figure in the minds of all the trial participants. Jasmine and Alan, who were previously lounging below the stage, finally focused their attention on Cain. He had made a lasting impression on them as the commoner who had outmatched them all. Murkrow, Tailwind, max speed wing attack, Cain commanded, unfazed by the gaze of the crowd. Murkrow took off from the stage, soaring high into the sky, picking up speed as he rode the gusts of wind. He reached his pinnacle before making a sharp turn and shooting across the square, leaving a whistling sound behind them. The onlookers were dumbfounded by Murkrow's performance. They were familiar with Cain's technique of utilizing gravity and momentum to increase Murkrow's power, but this time he wasn't holding back. He seemed determined, a far cry from his usual impassiveness. Their wait was short-lived. Murkrow plummeted from the sky, his wings wrapped in flying energy, shining with a soft white light. With a loud thud, he slammed into the trial stone. The ground trembled, giving the impression that the stone was about to shatter. The square was eerily silent after the attack, as if the commotion had left everyone speechless. Jasmine and Alan, who had been in a daze below the stage, finally shifted their focus to the black trial stone as well. The stunned silence was broken by a few glowing white words floating above its surface. Attack value, 458. All around the square, gasps of disbelief echoed as onlookers stared in shock at the result. They had been expecting Cain to take first place once again, but they never imagined his attack value would reach a staggering 458. This was a crushing victory, outpacing second-place Xander by an astonishing 121 points. Cain's dominance was awe-inspiring and left a lasting impression on all those present. The word that best described him at that moment was simple, yet powerful: terrifying.